Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This scene happened when I was 21 years old. It's in a smaller town outside of a huge city in the Midwest. This was 1981, and I worked at a fast food and they stayed open until 3 a.m. My then husband worked for a bowling bowl alley as a manager, and he was never off before 2 a.m. I was expecting my first child and business was slow, so I was sent home about 1 a.m. In the town we lived in, there was a large private girls' college. Women were being warned to lock their car doors because 2 males were still on the loose that were targeting women around my age. They were sometimes following them home and attacking or forcing a woman alone late at night off the road. The men were raping and killing the women, and they had killed 3 women by this point. 2 of the women were found on deserted roads and 1 in her apartment. There was no description of these men or what kind of vehicle they drove. I left work and I climbed into my car. I locked my doors and I started for home. The hair on the back of my head stood up on the end, and my gut feeling told me that something was very wrong. I figured out that I was being followed home. I took several turns around town trying to shake this car, but to no avail. The advice given was that if you thought you were being followed, is to drive to the police station. But we had just recently moved to this area, so I had no idea where the police station was. I was terrified. I panicked, and I couldn't think what to do. This was in the days with no cell phones, but the payphones were made in different areas where you could drive up to them, sit in the driver's seat, put your window down, and the payphones had a longer cord to enable you to stay in your car and just talk. You still had to deposit money in order to talk, even when you're calling 911. I thought briefly about trying to get to one of these phones, but I was too scared and I didn't think that I could have a coin ready in time before these men could have the time to approach me. My parents lived about 4 streets over from where I lived, and I decided that the safest decision was to try to make it to my parents' house. I was still being followed when I got to my parents' house. There was a short block that you could go around, and I went around this block about 3 times, and every single time that I did, I honked the horn. You would have thought that laying on the horn would have discouraged these creeps from continuing, but it had no effect. If anything, they moved in closer behind me. I pulled into their driveway, and these creeps pulled right in behind me, turned their lights off, and I heard their doors open and shut. I was beyond terror at this point, and they were out of their car, one coming up on one side and one on the other. My parents' house was a split level, and you pulled up in front of a double-car garage. In order to get into the house, you had to go in through the garage door or the front door, and the front door was to the left of the driveway, about 2 car lengths away, plus a set of steps. I laid on the horn again, and they still kept coming. My dad, who is a retired military, oftentimes stayed up late at night watching TV. And thank God that he did this night. All of a sudden, he turned the porch light on and burst out the front door. He assessed the situation instantly and started yelling at these creeps to get the fuck away from my car while barreling down the steps towards them. At first, they didn't retreat very fast, but they must have thought better. My dad is very big-boned and about 6'4". He had a brother that played in college football, and he wore a size 15 shoe. He made it to the front of their car and pounded on the hood of it before they were able to burn rubber, reversing out of the driveway. While he was unable to get a license number because they didn't have a front plate, he was able to describe them and gave a make and model to the police. The police told me how fortunate I was that my dad had realized what a dire situation I was in. I still get chills thinking back to that night, and I remember it as if it were yesterday. My dad said that he thought he heard a car honk more than once and that he heard me in the driveway. He had just shut off the TV and he was heading for bed when I pulled in. Thank God, my dad acted so quickly, or I might not be writing this today. This incident has caused me to be hyper aware of my surroundings, and I never turn into my driveway without making sure that I am not followed. Always be mindful of where you are, and don't walk around with your headphones on or phone pressed to your ear. You never know when you may be an opportunistic moment for someone with ill intentions. Know where your local police station is, and if you ever get chills that something is wrong, drive into the police station and the police are more than happy to help you out. It's really better safe than sorry. The police did capture these creeps about 2 weeks later, and they didn't get a fourth victim. They were both on probation for kidnapping and rape and served their time and decided killing their victims left no witnesses. My dad is still my hero today because his quick actions prevented me from being the fourth victim. And the color, model, and make of the car that my dad described was the description of what they were driving when they were arrested. This just happened to me an hour ago as I'm driving back home from work. As I'm at an intersection not too far from my house, there was a car from the opposite side of the road turning into where I'm going, and then we almost hit each other. We both stopped on time, and it was really no biggie. But the guy in the car is noticeably yelling at me from inside his car, giving me the middle finger. Well, alright, I just let him go ahead, and I thought that that would be the end of the road rage for tonight. But oh boy was I wrong. Immediately after I let the guy through, behind him was a car turning very fast, so I accelerated and I quickly got in front of him. Not out of ego or anything. I just thought that considering the position of my car in the turning lane, it's likely that this dumbass would hit me. But right afterwards, this guy is obviously pissed off and he starts flickering his extremely bright lights at me for a minute straight. It was annoying as hell, considering something brighter than the goddamn sun is shining at me for a minute, and you can tell that it's really hard to navigate at night like that. So I said to myself, well, two can play at this game, asshole. And I slowed down to 20 miles an hour from 50 for a minute or so. Still flicking his lights, but not as much at this point. At this point, I was close to home and I turned into my subdivision, thinking that this whole saga would end then and there. But holy shit, this guy follows me into my maze of a neighborhood, and I get near my house and he's still following me. I freaked the hell out and I was wondering, should I just park in my driveway and he will go away? Or maybe should I just go into a random neighborhood and then lose him there? So as soon as I passed my house, I decided to go right past it and into another neighborhood a couple of minutes away. And he follows me exactly to there. At this point, I left that neighborhood and I just freaking jumped on my gas pedal and I sped down the road and made a random right turn. At this point, this guy is still following me, but it's a red light for him, so thankfully he stops and after that he lost me. Honestly, this was a scary experience for me, considering that my suburb isn't too far from very dangerous hoods where gunshots can be heard often. Who knows that if I would have stopped my car at home, maybe this guy would have got a gun out and then shoot at me. It's just really creepy how this road rage asshole easily followed me to my house in an obvious attempt to scare me. Warning: allusions to suicide, death threats, harming language. Do not listen if this could upset you. Well, I've recently found this subreddit and I decided that I would share a story to you all. This happened back in 2019 to 2021 and it still sticks with me today. I will be using fake names for myself and the man that I'm talking about, Mary for me and Dennis for him. When I was 13, I met someone on Discord. He was funny, smart, and exactly my type. He was also 16. I don't know my logic with that being okay at 13, but I was stupid and naive. We became close friends, and after about 3 months of knowing him, I told him that I had feelings for him. We then ended up dating. We lived across country from each other, and we were basically just friends, but whatever. So, as we are dating, he starts basically grooming me. As a kid who was always on the internet and was exposed to kink, I was used to this behavior, and I thought that it was fine. He had me send nude photos, gross messages, and pretty much worship him. I wasn't allowed to talk to people on Discord without him there and stuff like that. He told me that he would kill himself if I ever left him, or how he was always on drugs because he was so sad. He also was incredibly racist and thought Nazi jokes were okay. And I'm so mad at myself for not realizing that it wasn't okay back then. He ends up cheating on me with his ex, and then he tossed me out the door. He doesn't talk to me anymore and says we shouldn't talk anymore because we aren't together. But here's where it gets bad. And note that this happened over 5 years ago and I have a spotty memory of this time. New accounts pop up in the server that we met on. It was a server of mutual friends, and those accounts start saying horrible things about me, saying Mary is a fat whale, Mary is a N-word, and more things of that sort. The accounts have names like Jerry Touches Kids or Big Fat Whale and etc. I had gotten in trouble with the server owners because it was my fault that people were saying these things, like I had told them to spam things about me or something. The accounts also started messaging me to kill myself, to die, how I'm a whale, a whore, and more. I just ended up blocking every account and I move on with my life. Great, it was over with, right? Or so I thought it was. Fast forward a year to late summer of 2019, and everything starts up again. The messages, him telling people lies and rumors, and also direct threats. I was sent unsolicited porn, death threats, slurs, and that I should kill myself because no one cares about me. And at that time, I had undiagnosed depression and anxiety, and I almost did kill myself. I went to therapy and I tried to get over it. In 2020, right when the quarantine happened, I got a boyfriend. I was super happy and I came back out of my shell. He and I would play games on Discord together, and I joined more servers. But around 2 months later, I got another message. Someone had messaged me named Lily, I believe. It was a normal profile, and we were in a server together, so I really thought nothing of it. She had then messaged me how I was, and I had never talked to her before, so I was kind of confused. She said we had a long conversation about mental health the day before, so she wanted to make sure that I was alright. I asked who she was and what she was talking about, and she said something like, "Oh, you told me about this. You said you take medicine for schizophrenia and must have missed a dose. Are you off your meds?" I was extremely confused and scared because I had never talked to this person and I certainly didn't have schizophrenia. After about 10 minutes of this charade, I realized that it was Dennis. I blocked the account and I didn't accept new friend request. The next day, I got hundreds of messages with the same contents that I previously mentioned, the threats, porn, etc., and I was so terrified that I asked my boyfriend for help. He told me to make a new account and not friend any other mutual friends so he couldn't find me. I did what he suggested, which caused an affiliated Twitch account that I had spent years building. I changed all my accounts, deleted most, and I made new ones. The messages found me again. I have no idea how. These new accounts weren't tied to me. I got fed up and I had asked a mutual friend that I thought that I could trust some personal information about Dennis to go to the police and get a possible restraining order or something. And I didn't totally know how the police handled these issues. Months go by and nothing. Well, until the fall of 2021, in which Dennis messages me again, calling me a stupid bitch, and how he will always find me, and how I'm so fat and dumb and that no one loves me. And I isolated myself and deleted more accounts. I never was able to go to the police because I had no information, like his full name or address. It's been 2 years, and every day I worry if he lives near me, if he knows where I live or where I go to school. I recently found out that he had a website and made YouTube videos. He has made YouTube videos referencing me. His copyright claim is something like Mary the Fat Whale Inc. I can't find it anymore, so I put the closest to what I remembered. It was hell, and I'm still worried every single day that he will find me. I believe he has a Reddit account and could find this. And I hope that we don't meet again, Dennis. I wish you the worst. Short backstory. This happened almost a year ago. I'm a 19-year-old female and I lived in a small town in Australia. I always take my 13-year-old Jack Russell mix for a short 20-minute walk down the road at about 7 to 7:30 p.m. On this night, I had to take him at about 8 to 8:30 p.m. as I had to work late. The sun was just setting to the point where I can see, but not too well. That could have just been my poor eyesight, but it was enough to manage without needing a flashlight. Although I did have one on me, I just didn't want to use it. We had just made our loop around a small community garden, and as I was leaving the gate, I looked to my right, and I saw a person in all black heading towards me. I was also wearing all black, so we both looked pretty suspicious. But out of panic, I crossed the road and I headed left. They did the same not 1 second later. I'm a naturally fast walker, but I made myself go faster. All I had to do was cross the road one more time and then turn right, go down a few houses, and then I'm home. So I'm walking faster, but not enough to where it was obvious. I crossed the road and I turned right, and this person didn't cross the road, but he turned right and stayed on the other side of the road. We were about parallel on the street, and I knew that if they crossed the road, I could run, and I wasn't too far from home. When I got into my yard, the person stopped across the road, and at this point, I realized that the door was locked and I didn't have a key. The person stayed across the road as I rang the bell. I was pounding on the door, and my older brother answered, and the person had just made it into our yard. My brother told this person to F off, and he walked back the way we came. My brother asked who it was, and I explained everything to him. From this day, I take my dog for a walk before work, early in the morning, rather than after work at night. I do enjoy sunset walks, but for my safety, I stop them, even after a year. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city, and I found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides. With my front door being at the start of the corridor, my bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking, talking, and etc. from my bedroom, and for any room for that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30-ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and I hopped into the bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knocking coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so, and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. And sure enough, it was pitch black, so I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room. But before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door and if he thought that it was amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at 7:30. And I believed him, and I hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and I saw nothing. I then unlocked the door, took a peek, and closed the door and locked it. Me, being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking. So I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and I ran out to the apartment hall, and I heard someone booking it down the steps. And I heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall. So I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this is was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and I then called the cops, and they were there within a few minutes and then scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night, and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was that ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner, he didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone while walking into my apartment. But so far, nothing has come of it. I've let it go at the moment, and I just hope that it won't happen again. It was in 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since its release, and I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on a voice call. It was a night like any other, following my usual route. It was around 2 a.m. and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers, and I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home. I was standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but it was quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk. He was just a few meters away from me, and he was holding head shears in his hand, and there were a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." But despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before leaving. So I stayed, but while keeping an eye on the man's actions. As I looked at the man, I realized that he wasn't cutting any branches. He was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then, he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally, I had enough. I decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back home, and my friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me. And indeed, he was, still holding the head shears about 10 meters behind me. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my way longer. I wanted to be sure that he was following me and that it wasn't just a coincidence. And yes, he continued to follow me. I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something happened. And when I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath, but I was safe. There was no one behind me, and I entered my home feeling relieved. Suddenly, a white car pulled up right in front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with the pruning shears. Now, he knew where I lived. I rushed inside. I locked everything. I grabbed a kitchen knife and I waited until someone woke up so that I could go to bed. There were no further incidents, and nobody believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college. I also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led me having to sign on at the job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and then placed me in a group that was supposed to teach me interview skills in order to fix that. Well, the group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think that they put me in the wrong group or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in to make up the numbers. But that's not really relevant to the story. The other group members didn't do much to help with my shyness either, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me, and obviously didn't share any of my interest. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of one member that I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it was something generic like John, so that's what I'll call him. John immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during their introduction to the course to complain that him being there was useless since he would be retiring in a few years anyways, and that no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction he wanted, I assume that the rest of the group thought that he was just attention-seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in the course. He waited until he had been given paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but that she was a lying bitch and he never put a hand on her. She didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial or any evidence of bruises or other injuries before that either, because she was a woman. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and then sent him to jail. This immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch true criminal channels on YouTube, and I have never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never even happened, that didn't leave any visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beaten his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he had been arrested on other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. I immediately decided that I wanted nothing to do with him regardless of which one it was, and that I would avoid interacting with him as much as possible, outside of the polite hellos and passing him things if he asked. Like I said before, I didn't really interact much without the other members of the group at all because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, and I spent the dinner break in the library while the men all snuck off to the pub and then went home immediately after the second half was over. No one has ever asked me how I spent my breaks, and since the pub and the library were in the opposite directions from each other and couldn't be seen from the front of the building the group met in, because of the way the streets were arranged, there should have been no way for any of them to know where I had been, which made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, there was a day where I had bumped into a friend on my dinner break, and I decided to put off visiting the library until the course was over for the day, just to catch up with them instead. When I did get around to it, I spent at least quarter of an hour there before heading to the desk to check out my books, and I ended up being drawn into a conversation by the librarian who had noticed that I was checking out books related to a franchise that he also enjoyed, and that was getting a new movie the next year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with talking to a friendly man around my age who shared my interest after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We had been talking for another quarter of an hour when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, kinda looking confused and concerned, and was just opening his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by my shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touched without warning and would never have done that to me. So I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger, and I knocked their hands away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face, and as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing he would find me there and how I practically lived there before chattering at me as if we were close friends. I was just completely confused. It was obvious that he hadn't just coincidentally bumped into me from the way he was talking, but John had been kept behind while the group was heading out because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly, and as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of seeing where I had gone. It had also been half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left not long after me and just seen me go in while we were walking in the same direction, he would have come inside by then. The only way it made sense for him to know to look for me there and joke that I practically lived there would be if he had somehow learned that I was going to the library during dinner breaks, known that I hadn't that day, and guessed that I would go after the meeting instead. What made that even stranger than it already was is the fact that John had never shown any interest in me during the group sessions and mostly ignored me the way I ignored him unless we were forced to interact for whatever reason. So, why was he now following me into other buildings to start conversations out of nowhere and acting like we were close? While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in to ask if I knew the man because he had obviously seen my negative reaction to being touched by John, and when I briefly explained the situation to him, he asked John politely to please leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to tell the man that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said that we weren't and how ridiculous it would be to claim an 18-year-old girl and a 50-something or 60-something-year-old man were friends in the first place. When the librarian asked again and outright told him that harassing other customers wasn't acceptable and he would be removed from the building if he refused to leave me alone, John smiled and agreed to leave in a tone that you use when you're humoring a child before walking out and very obviously stationing himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave too. The librarian was clearly concerned by this and asked for the full story of what was going on, and I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to know that I would be there in the first place. He suggested that I should stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop to make sure that John left me alone, but it would be several hours, and if I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting that I had later that evening. So he asked me to at least come in the next time I was there to let him know that I was safe, and reluctantly watched me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking what the librarian's problem was, and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering him and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed me by my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we aren't getting the same bus because I had never seen him on the same one as me, he corrected me and said that we both needed the number blank bus and told me where he lived, which was in fact on the same bus route as me. Although I was still tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, and possibly sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the walk home, it was very clear that he was going to follow me if I did, because he still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away. There were several dark alleys on the way that I had no intention of going anywhere near while in his company. When I agreed to go to the closer bus stop, he let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were good friends again. John kept walking when we reached the stop, which was odd, but I was hoping that my lack of response to anything he said had made him give up and decide to leave me alone, or that he had mixed up the bus stop with one further along and I could run while his back was turned. Well, no luck, but as soon as he realized that I wasn't following him anymore, John came back, frowning as if he was confused and asking me, "I thought we were going for coffee together." Shocked, I told him bluntly no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him, and when that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed that I had mentioned while leaving the classroom that I wanted some coffee, so he thought that we could go together. That was an obvious lie too, since I don't drink coffee and I told him so. John's only answer was to say that I didn't have to get coffee and kept pushing me to go to a cafe with him. I firmly told him no, and apparently he took that as me not wanting to drink in public because he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we get there, I'm not to worry because that's just his 18-year-old daughter. Because an 18-year-old daughter is definitely going to lounge around naked on her father's furniture in front of him, right? Other people at the stop were staring at us, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18 and firmly tell John that I don't want to go to his flat with him and to leave me alone. He completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and that I was at least 29, when most people at that time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. The bus arrived at that moment, and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe there and the driver would throw him off if need be. Well, no. When I sat in an aisle seat to stop John from sitting next to me, he physically shoved me across the seat, pitting me in against the window to the point that I could barely move, and pressing his knees up against the seat in front of him to make sure that I had no room to get past him unless he allowed it. The only way for me to get out would have involved me straddling his lap since the seats in front of us were occupied. I loudly told him to move and to leave me alone, but he ignored me, and then he continued trying to convince me to come to his flat. And although a few people gave me uncomfortable looks, when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men in the hopes that they would help me, they would look away as if they hadn't noticed or suddenly become very interested in their phones. I spent the ride huddled against the window, trying to touch him as little as possible, and was ignored again when I shouted at him to stop touching me because he kept putting his hand on my thigh and as high up as he could get without directly groping me. No one did anything about it, but he stopped touching me after that. He had apparently also given up on convincing me to go to his flat that day, but when we were coming up to the apartment block, he pointed it out to me. Physically turning my face when I refused to look, told me his apartment number, and tried to give me a kiss goodbye on the cheek. And when I dodged, before getting off the bus and knocking on the opposite window to try and get my attention so he could wave at me. When the bus set off again, several people started loudly talking about how disgusting he was and that men like him should be reported, while refusing to look in my direction where I was sat shaking and seething in my seat. And other than an awkward, so are you alright? From the driver, just as I was about to step off the bus, no one bothered to check on me. As soon as I got home, I sent an email to the instructor telling her that I wanted to switch groups and never see that man again, explaining what he had done to me. She read it, but ignored it for an entire week until I sent a follow-up threatening to get the police involved if they forced me to interact with this man again. And their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead, essentially kicking me out as if I was the problem. I bumped into the man not long afterwards, and he tried to ask me why I hadn't been attending the group anymore, admitting that he had asked the instructor and they refused to tell him. But I managed to get away and lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few times in passing in the years since, but fortunately, he has never noticed me or approached me again. And I hope that it stays that way. So recently, I had a few encounters with a delivery guy. The first thing he asked me was, "Are you," my full name, "from my previous address?" "You moved, huh?" While smiling creepily, I thought he was just a delivery guy that was trying to do small talk, so I just brushed him off. I am living alone, so I thought I was just being overthinking by getting creeped out. Then I realized after I thought about it that he was my neighbor in my previous address. He struck up a conversation with me, saying that he knows one of my friends. I don't really like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk with him long, but it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him, like I felt that he was dangerous. After that, I was going out and I saw him again delivering to my neighbor, and I ignored him trying to walk by. He saw me and then recognized me even after I was wearing a mask, and he asked me the same question again. After that, since I don't go out much, I don't see him as often. There was this one time that he was standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by. Then, I saw him in my Facebook friend request, and I just ignored him again, but I was obviously creeped out, so I told my friend that he said he knew. At first, my friend said that she doesn't know anyone with that name, but his last name made her recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never really talked. His family didn't know he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, which was older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one at my apartment, so I sighed in relief thinking maybe I left it open. I work nights, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. But now that I am thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I am thinking of installing a CCTV in front of my apartment. I am still scared though because he knows my address. Update. My friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go and he'll take revenge on me. She also told me that he might be doing drugs as sold by his family since he is acting suspicious. The most that I can do right now is just to change my locks and install a CCTV in front. Please wish me luck, guys. Another update. Thank you. I am overwhelmed by you guys worrying about me. So far, I haven't encountered him anymore, though I don't really go out much, and I also set my delivery name to my boyfriend's. Maybe because his family knew and talked to him, I haven't caught anything strange around my house too. I think I am in a safe zone now, and I am going to move to a different city a few months after this, probably with my dog. About 3 years ago, when I was 18, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant in the mall. I am very introverted, but it never affected my relationship with my customers. But speaking to people that I wasn't serving gave me major butterflies. I had just finished my shift at around 5 p.m. and I was walking out when I noticed a woman who looked in pain, holding her stomach, and was looking at me. I had to walk past her to get to the exit, and I was trying to avoid her because I was not looking for conversation, and I hated when people ask for money. I know, it's very selfish, but I work really hard for the little money that the customers tip me that day. I maneuvered my way around the people, but she called out to me. I acted like I didn't hear her, and I moved faster. But eventually, she ran to me and grabbed my arm crying. Please, Please, brother, I got children and I got cancer of the tummy. And she lifted up her dirty shirt and showed me a large surgery wound across her stomach. I told her that I didn't have anything, but she continued to badger me. Eventually, I just ran to the stairs and I went upstairs and I saw her chasing, but I was way more faster. She slowed down at the second case to catch her breath, and I turned in to get off at the third floor where she could not see me. I then took the elevator next to the stairs back to the first floor so I could get to the exit. Eventually, I got to the bus stop and I was on my way home. When I got off at my stop, I went to the corner shop to get a bread. But at the end of the road, I saw the woman from the mall and her boyfriend. They must have definitely seen me, even though I made an effort to take a longer way home so they wouldn't have seen me. At around 7 o'clock, I get a knock at my gate. I live in a house that has 2 slide gates in front of the main entrance. I looked out of the window, and to my horror, I saw the woman and her boyfriend. I stayed quiet and I hoped that they would just go away, but they stayed outside of my house for 2 hours until my parents arrived. They begged my parents for money or food to feed their kids, and my father found it weird that they were there at 9 p.m., so he told them that we didn't have any and to get away from the house before they called the police. And surprisingly, they left without any hassle. I told my parents that these people were begging me for my money at the mall and that they followed me home and stayed outside the house for 2 hours. Luckily, we never saw them again after that day. To start, I'd like to say that at the time of this, I was only 14 at that time, so I was in my last year of middle school when this all happened. That's when I found a note in my locker. It fell out as soon as I opened the door and floated to the ground. Given how crumpled it looked, it was as though it was hastily shoved between the crack of my locker door. Picking it up, I realized that it was a card. Opening it, I was greeted with a picture of myself in a shape of a heart. I immediately blushed as I saw this. My friends, huddling close to see what it was, all gawked and then started teasing me for having a secret admirer. I have never dated before, so I wasn't sure how to feel about all of this. But I wasn't exactly against it at that time. Wait! One of my friends said, trying to calm down the group. There's something written on the back. What does it say? Another asked. Turning the card around, there was a handwritten note on the back. To the lovely Miss Singh. I began reading out loud. I have fawned over your beauty from afar since you first came to this school. I am entranced by your looks and your kind heart, and I shall wait for the day when I can confess my love to you. Until then, I shall continue to gaze lovingly from afar. From your soulmate. The girls around me began to giggle. Soulmate, huh? My best friend laughed. Well, he certainly has a way with words. I wonder who it is. Another girl asked. I doubt any boys that go here could write like that. Maybe it's a girl? She said between chuckles. After more teasing from my friends, we eventually went to class. It was boring as ever. Mr. Gordvik tried his best, but history is not a class that could ever excite me. After a few classes, it was finally lunch. So me and the girls decided to talk about the note again, and more importantly, how to figure out who my secret admirer was. Well, I think that it's Miles, Beth guessed. The track dude in Mr. G's class? I asked. Yeah, he was totally checking you out in history class. Another friend agreed. Then he got totally chewed out by Mr. Gordvik. I've never seen him scold anyone that badly. I let out a sigh and asked, any other candidates? And while Miles was pretty cute, I wasn't into the super fit workout kind of guy. After a while of speculating, my friends convinced me to talk to Miles, just to get his name off the list of candidates. We chatted for a bit, but it seemed very clear that Miles wasn't my secret admirer. And while my friends thought that he might just be playing coy, the next day I found another letter in my locker, this time much less romantic. In the letter, my so-called admirer called me a whore and a sadist for playing with his feelings. Red flags about this guy were being raised at an alarming rate. He was acting like I cheated on him, even though I have no idea who he is. At this point, I wanted as little to do with whoever this was, but given how just talking to someone set him off, I wanted to get to the bottom of this before things got worse. Thinking on my feet, since this guy clearly went by my locker a lot, I taped a note to my locker door at the end of the school calling him out, asking for a meetup behind the bleachers after school. Of course, I wasn't dumb enough to meet someone that weird all alone, or at all to be honest. And while I said to meet me there, I secretly hid with a couple of my friends not too far away, simply waiting to see who turned up. And to both my surprise as well as my disgust, the person who showed up was my history teacher, Mr. Gordvik. While I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, the note in his hand certainly looked like the one that I had taped to my locker. Me and my friends all simply hid there for what I think was around half an hour, and Mr. G just stood there, waiting. Eventually, he walked away looking visibly angry as he did. I looked over to my friends and they looked back at me. The feelings of disgust and fear surrounded the group. I wasn't sure what I planned on doing after finding out who it was, but now I was completely lost. I had no idea how to handle things, but luckily, one of my friends told me that I needed to report this to the guidance counselor. I was hesitant because the last thing that I wanted to do was let Mr. Gordvik know that I found out that he was my stalker. But she was right. This couldn't go on left unchecked. The counselor had already left to go home by now, so we decided that I'd do it the first thing tomorrow morning. When the day came, I went to put my things in my locker. When I stopped, there was a terrible smell coming from my locker. I noticed it just as I was about to unlock it. Feeling a pit form in my throat as I slowly opened the locker, I pulled by the door to reveal a picture of me with the words, "Stop messing with me," in bold written in red marker. And below the photo was a disgusting slab of raw meat. It was cut into the shape of a heart, and I hurled, whether it was from the smell, the sight, or the fear of the situation, I don't know. But all I do know is that by the time that I was feeling slightly better, a crowd has already formed around me. My friends were there trying to make me feel better. Then Beth helped me up and took me to the nurse's office. In there, after a few minutes, the guidance counselor came in. She said that my friends told her what happened, but she wanted to hear directly from me to get my perspective on the situation. I broke down crying. I told her everything, the notes, Mr. G waiting behind the bleachers, and then the meat in my locker. The counselor nodded her head, stroking my back as I cried into her shoulder, saying nothing until I was finished, before trying to comfort me and then reassure me that everything will be okay. And to my surprise, she was right. Within the day, Mr. Gordvik was suspended for evaluation, which by the third day, after finding footage of him putting something into my locker was found, on the school security system, which resulted in his house being searched. And while they didn't find much evidence, what they did find was very condemning. A single journal, which contained his day-to-day thoughts, and a few photos from me, which were from my Facebook, printed out and framed, were all that they needed to press charges. His teaching license was revoked, and he was put on a watch list. I never saw Mr. G in person again, only a few times on the news. So, to Mr. Gordvik, my disgusting and sick history teacher, I hope we never meet again. The hum of treadmills and clinking of weights surrounded me as I pushed through my workout at the gym. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I noticed this guy. He was always in the corner of my eye. He was there every time that I looked up, watching, lingering. At first, I thought he was observing me to get some examples of exercises, or it was really just a coincidence. But as the days passed, I realized that he was a constant presence. A knot tightened in my stomach. His gaze followed me from machine to machine, like a shadow that refused to fade. I began to feel uneasy, and I was checking over my shoulder more often than focusing on my reps. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted in a place where I should feel safe. The guy's eyes bore into me, and his presence became suffocating. I started changing my routine. I was going at odd hours, hoping to escape his watchful eyes. And one day, he approached me with a forced smile on his face, I think. My guard went up, every instinct screaming at me to back away. He started making small talk, really too close for comfort, and I kept my responses short, desperately trying to find an escape route. As the days turned into weeks, the constant stalking took a toll on my nerves, and I really debated reporting it, but fear held me back. What if it makes him angry? What if he retaliated? What if it makes things worse? But then, suddenly it stopped. The guy disappeared from the gym as abruptly as he had appeared. No more lingering glances, no more unsettling presence, and the weight on my shoulders lifted, but my confusion lingered. What changed? Why did he stop? I cautiously resumed my irregular routine, glancing over my shoulder less frequently. The gym returned to a place of focus and determination rather than the fear, but still, the memory of those watchful eyes haunted me. Hi everyone. This situation has been ongoing for many months, and I'm really interested to hear others' perception and any possible advice. I have lived at my apartment complex since 2021. It's a pretty big place with lots of buildings, lots of people, and lots of dogs. I have a dog myself who is unfortunately reactive. I generally just keep to myself when walking her, and I pivot if we see someone walking towards us. Many months ago, I started seeing this guy show up at the same time that I walk my dog. He would be walking to the dog park on the far back entrance. He sees how my dog is and makes no attempt to give us space. In fact, there are times where he even gets closer to us, and this has happened for months. I begin to think that maybe he's just tense, maybe unaware, or something like that, and think that maybe he's just trying to let his dog play early in the morning before work. So I start taking my dog out 30 minutes earlier. But he starts coming out at the same time too, 30 minutes earlier. Again, he does not try to avoid me when I am actively trying to get away from him. He has never said a word to me, and he is constantly showing up right after I leave, no matter what time or however often I deviate from my schedule. The other day, I am out with my mom walking my dog, and we see him across the parking lot walking towards us. He has always expected me to move out of the way even though I am there first. Plus, my dog is pooping so I can't really move. He walks like 2 feet to the right of us, so of course, my dog is going ballistic. My mom noticed too and said that's weird. Well, tonight, it happened again. I said screw it. I will move out of his way because I don't want to deal with a headache. So I move off the sidewalk and then walk next to this fence, keeping my dog on a tight leash because she's just freaking out now. As we were almost right next to each other but several feet apart, I look over and see that he's kind of behind me and still walking towards the park. I get back on the sidewalk and my dog suddenly jumps behind me in a protective stance. I turn around and this man was standing less than 10 feet behind me, facing me and staring and not saying a word. Apologies for the novel. I just really needed to provide background information. So, what are your thoughts? And how should I address this creepy neighbor? I'm a female, and I have had my fair share of creeps. I may share those stories in another post, but for this one, I'm going to share the one that scared me the most. I was 25 at that time, only recently moving out of my parents' home to a small apartment. And now that I'm living on my own, I had to get my own groceries and the sorts. So, I stopped by the supermarket in the evening, like after work, looking for things that I would need. As I wandered through the aisles of the store, I was just minding my own business and I picked up a few things. But then I noticed a guy who was watching me out of the corner of my eye. Politely, I just tried to ignore it until he approached me with a confident grin. "Hey, you're pretty cute. Can I get your number?" he asked, a bit too eagerly. I politely declined, saying that I wasn't interested. And that's when his smile faded and then replaced by a scowl. An uncomfortable tension hung in the air as I slowly and awkwardly back away to continue my shopping. As I passed through the canned goods, I could feel his eyes on me, the unease growing with each aisle that I navigated. And when I reached the checkout, I hoped that he would give it up and hopefully leave. But instead, he remained, lingering nearby me. He looked angry, yet determined. Feeling very uneasy by this, I quickly paid before grabbing my bags and making a beeline for the exit. As I stepped outside, I just couldn't help but look back, wanting to know if he was following me. And so he was. Panic set in, but I tried to keep my cool, briskly walking toward the crowded street. However, after looking back at him, the guy quickened his pace, now openly upset. I turned a corner, almost running at this point. I was trying to lose him, but his strides were much bigger than mine, and I could visibly see the distance between us shrinking as he followed. Fear gripped me, and I broke into a full sprint, dodging through the bustling crowd, and I glanced behind me. And then I was relieved to see that he was falling behind, getting blocked by the crowds. I didn't stop there though. I continued my mad dash until I reached a well-lit area with more people. The man was now nowhere in sight, and gasping for breath, I hailed a cab to take me home, constantly checking my surroundings. After arriving at my home, Now safe behind my front door, I locked it with a sigh of relief. This encounter left me shaken, reminding me of the danger that could lurk in unexpected places. I spent the evening looking over my shoulder, paranoid that the man may have followed me home somehow. Needless to say, I did not get much sleep that night. I was grateful for my escape, but now I am much more cautious of the shadows that seem to stretch a bit too far. I never go out in the evenings anymore. I had always been a quiet guy, keeping to myself in university and focusing on my studies. But things changed when I was partnered for a project with Lisa. She was a classmate of mine. It started with her asking me really personal questions that had nothing to do with the project, followed by a lot of texts and following me around with the excuse that she wanted to work on the assignment. But even after the assignment was handed in, she didn't stop there. She was constantly messaging me, following me everywhere, and eventually showing up at my actual home, which I never told her the location of. She cornered me, eyes wild, and demanded that I date her. I really tried to reason with her and tell her that I wasn't interested, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The intensity in her gaze made my skin crawl. I barely managed to slip through my door as she tried to grab my arm. Well, things escalated a week later when I woke up one night hearing some kind of commotion downstairs. I live alone, so it's not like I had a roommate or anything that would make noise. So I went down the stairs, and I stopped as I locked eyes with the last person that I wanted to see. A chill ran down my spine as I saw the glint of a knife in her hand. She was calm, but she was demanding as she told me that I had to be with her. Fear gripped me, but I knew that I had to stay calm. I managed to keep my composure, or at least a facade of it. She asked me why I refused to be with her and asked if there was someone else. Thinking fast, I took out my phone and I scrolled through my contacts. Most of the people on there were family, since I talked to my friends mostly on Discord. Calming her down with this, I sneakily hit the emergency call while putting my phone back into my pocket. Hopefully, someone would get the idea and then send help. Luckily enough, they did. A few minutes later, I heard the sirens. Seeing the look of realization in her eyes, I knew that I had to be anywhere else but in the room with her. So I bolted for the bathroom, shutting it behind me and then locking it. To my surprise, however, the only knock on the door came minutes later, and it was the gruff sound of a man, a police officer. They escorted me outside and told me that Lisa had attempted to run when they entered the building. He assured me that I would be safe now, and I believed him. In court, the reality of her obsession unfolded. Evidence of stalking me came to light, and this evidence consisted of photographs of me that I had no idea that existed. There was a journal that was detailing my daily schedule and many other disturbing things. She was charged with breaking and entering, armed with a deadly weapon. And as the judge delivered the verdict, relief washed over me. Lisa was sentenced to 8 months in a state penitentiary, followed by probation and mandatory therapy. I felt the weight lifted off my shoulders, knowing that I'd be safe from her for the time being. I really learned to be more cautious. I installed better security, and I kept a watchful eye on my surroundings. The university that was once a place of learning became a backdrop for a nightmare for me. The legal system did its part, and now I'm doing mine to keep myself safe. Eventually, my fears of Lisa's obsession began to fade, or at least they did. until Lisa was released last week. And while she's supposed to be on probation, I'm still afraid that she might come here again and do something drastic. I've never forgotten that event, even though it happened over 10 years ago. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I still get goosebumps, and it's even creepier with my adult eyes. In fact, to be more precise, this event took place over a period of more than 6 months. To put it into context, it all started when I was about 14. At that time, I was attending a private secondary school in the south of France, and I used to go to my grandmother's every evening. I wait there for my mother to get off work and then pick me up. My grandmother, who was retired, would wait for me in her car when I got out of school. But the more time passed, the more I wanted to be independent. So I asked her if I could take the bus home, and she agreed. I like to put my headphones on and take advantage of the long journey just to listen to my favorite music and be in my own bubble. The nearest bus stop to her house was about 10 minutes away on foot because, by bad coincidence, the one opposite the dead end she is living in had been condemned for the lack of use. But that didn't bother me, as I'm more of a stroller by nature. So I started taking the same bus every single day at roughly the same time. Although this could vary, I didn't have classes on Wednesday afternoons, for example. When I was 14, I was really childlike, and when I say childlike, I mean I've always had a childish face. But this time, it really showed. I didn't have a woman's shape, and I always had a cute stuffed animal hanging on my bag. Well, I guess you can imagine that. I first noticed this guy on the bus. It must have been around September to October. He must have been in his 40s, not very tall, and he was also bald. Why did I notice him, you might ask? Well, because he was staring at me. I even had that feeling that he wasn't blinking. He was giving me smiles that didn't inspire confidence, but it was completely instinctive. I'd never been confronted with the reality of the world, and I was still very naive, but I knew something wasn't right. I didn't say anything. I just decided to run away from the situation that didn't make me feel comfortable by looking in another direction, and that was that. But that was just the beginning of something that I would remember forever. This man took the same bus as me every day at the same time, even when my schedule changed. To this day, I still have no idea how he could have got this information. Was he watching me? Did he live around the school? He was always staring at me with those strange smiles, never letting up, but never talking to me. I would get off the bus at my stop, and he would stay on, and then the cycle would start all over again the next day. I was so terrified of this situation that I didn't dare tell anyone. I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me, and also that I wouldn't be allowed out of the house afterwards. And then one day, it was around May to June at the end of the school year. I have had enough. I got off at a stop halfway through the journey, and I hid naively behind a tree to try and lose him. I'd had enough of these persistent stares. Except that guy also got off, and he started looking for me. There was nobody around, and that's when I realized that I wasn't safe. The guy was calling me. He said, "Where are you, sweetheart? Come on, let's have a chat." I was, so to speak, sweating and unable to move from my tree. Of course, he eventually found me. He said, "You're really pretty, you know that? I'd love to have a chat, get to know you." Frankly, I didn't want to get to know him at all. He terrified me, and I wanted to go home. I tried to make him understand that he was freaking me out, and I wanted him to leave me alone. I asked him what he wanted, and he kept saying the same thing over and over again. "I just want us to get to know each other." The next bus arrived, and I took the opportunity to run to it, except that he did too. He sat down, stopped talking, and stared at me smiling. I was in an internal panic. My thoughts were going in all directions and I didn't know what to do. I made the worst decision of all, getting off at my usual stop and going back to my grandma's anyway, thinking that he would just do as usual and then stay on the bus. Except that this time, he got off at the same time as me. The stop was in a very lightly trafficked area. I told myself that he was going to kidnap me and that he was going to take me down a small path and that I would never be able to go home again. But I didn't want him to notice my fear, as it seemed to fuel him in a kind of domineering pleasure. So he started asking me to get to know each other again while following me. I picked up the pace, but he kept lining up with me and he wouldn't let go. Eventually, I reached my grandmother's dead end and finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I ran up to her house and she was standing in the doorway reading a book. She saw me coming, red face still shaking with a panic, with a bold guy staring at us from behind the gate. She saw my face and I didn't need to talk to her. She yelled that she was going to call the cops if he didn't get out of there fast. So he turned around and left the dead end. After that, my grandmother refused to let me back on the bus. Until my senior year, she picked me up in front of the school gate every single day. And I never saw that man again. When I think that this guy, this adult, followed a 14-year-old girl home, that he became fixated on me, and that this happened every single day, who knows how far it could have gone? Maybe that's the most worrying thing about all of this. So to this man, let's not meet again, and I hope that he never meets a young girl again as well. Today, I no longer take public transport unless I'm accompanied because it terrifies me. I'm a 20-year-old female, and when I was younger, maybe around 13 or 14, I was walking to town with my mother. I live in a small town in England. It was really a quick walk, like maybe 15 minutes. But about 5 minutes after leaving my house, I had one of the most unsettling encounters ever. While walking, there was a man approaching us. Nothing was weird at this point. I thought that he would walk past us like everyone else. However, this random man leaned in towards me as he was walking past, and then he whispered something to me. I remember it being creepy and along the lines of him knowing where I lived. It was subtle and happened quickly. I was shocked, especially since my mother was right next to me. A really bold move from a creepy guy. I recall the man being possibly in his late 20s, kind of scruffy looking, a little chubby, with longish brown hair and a beard. But I knew that I've never seen him before this point. I waited a few seconds for us to distance ourselves, and then I turned to my mom, completely freaked out, and I quietly asked her if she heard what the guy had said. She said she didn't, and I thought that maybe I misinterpreted the situation, or maybe I just misheard him then. We kind of brushed it off and just continued with our day. I felt uneasy, but tried not to think about it, and the rest of the day was fairly normal. Until the morning after, when my dad was talking to our neighbor. My neighbor told my dad that during the early hours of the morning, there was this man that was lurking right outside our houses for some time. He was hovering over my dad's and my neighbor's cars. Now, this is really weird because we live in a kind of closed-off area, and the only people we see outside of our homes are neighbors. But even they wouldn't come right up to our doors, especially not at like 2 to 3 a.m. Even delivery drivers can't find our house most of the time because we're very hidden away. This has never happened before, and never again after this. Well, at least to our knowledge. Of course, you can imagine how absolutely terrified I was to hear this. I explained to my dad what had happened the day before, and I reminded my mom, kind of a "I told you so" moment. I felt scared to be in my own home, and I remember calling my friend and talking about the situation. We researched about what we could do, but there wasn't really any action we could take. Just had to be observant and cautious, I guess. I can't remember much about what happened after that, but I never saw that man again. The whole situation creeps me out, and it doesn't make sense to me. The man outside my house wasn't confirmed to be the same man that walked past me earlier, as it was too dark to make out any discernible features. But it sure is an amazing coincidence if so. I never knew where to talk about this experience, but I figure that it belongs here, and I would love to hear your opinions and theories. Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm 25 years old. I want to share something that I have experienced that really messed up my confidence and also my trust. My confidence in people and in the safety of my own home. It has all been shattered. I've only just started putting my life back together, and finally, I feel comfortable enough to share this. This story happened 4 years ago, and I just finished the shift in a diner that I worked in. And just as we were about to close, a bunch of teenagers came in 5 minutes before we were off, and then they ordered a ton of things. And as a side note, from someone who works in places like these, do us a favor and please, don't come in the store when we're almost closed. We would really appreciate that. Anyway, going back to the story. The street lights flickered as I walked home, and the only thing that I could hear was the clicking of my heels against the pavement. My house was a walking distance from the diner, and the buses had stopped running at this hour. So even though I was a bit creeped out of how late it was, I really didn't have a choice but to walk. But as I walked, I heard it. Another set of footsteps behind me. Not really wanting to give in to my paranoia, I tried my best not to look behind me. But eventually, the urge to see what was there got the better of me. And as I did, I saw one of the teens from the diner. He was walking behind me. Did he leave his friends? He seemed to be staring at me, as our eyes met for a moment when I looked back at him. Feeling awkward and a little bit uneasy, I turned around and I picked up the pace, glancing nervously behind me occasionally. And as I turned onto my street, I could still hear his footsteps a few yards behind me. Also, they seemed to be a bit faster than before. Was he following me? My heart raced, each step echoing in my ears. But finally, I reached my apartment, and my fingers were trembling as I unlocked the door. Inside, the dim light from the street barely comforted me. Looking out of the windows, I noticed the young man sitting on my porch. He noticed me peeking through the curtains, and then he got up slowly and knocked on my door. My eyes widened with fear as the man continued to knock, and his knocks were getting louder and more aggressive each time his knuckles hit the door. Freaking out, I grabbed my phone and I called the cops, and I was explaining to them my fears in the situation. They promised that someone would be there in a few minutes, but the minutes dragged on for what felt like hours. And at last, just when I felt like the door was going to give way to what at this point him punching the door, I heard the sirens in the distance that signaled their arrival. Relief washed over me as they approached him, and at first, he didn't take notice, but after they got physical, he seemed quiet and compliant to go with them. Finally feeling brave enough to step out of my house, I look at my door and the relief from before was replaced by morbid fear. The door was a bloody mess. Looking from the man, who was now in a squad car, I realized that it was from him punching my door. And in the midst of blood and scratches was a large dent in my door. Why? What drove him to go that far, and what did he want from me? When asked at the police station, he said that I had dropped something on the way back home, and he was trying to give it back to me. But given his attempt to break into my house, I highly doubt that, and of course, the police didn't believe him. I got my door replaced with a stronger one, and then I had the windows changed too while I was at it. It really wasn't cheap, but I simply couldn't sleep otherwise, knowing that if he had gone at the windows like that, he would have easily been able to get in. And I don't want to think about what would happen if he ever did. So I moved to a new place. I'm Indian, and I frequently go to Indian grocery stores. I have been to this store a couple of times since I moved, and one day, I did something silly during checkout. Please note that I'm short, and I was helplessly trying to reach for the divider to separate the groceries in the checkout line. I looked around, and I was hoping that nobody noticed. But this cashier guy is smiling at the whole situation. I smiled back, and I just try to get done with the checkout ASAP. But from that day onwards, I find this guy trying to grab my attention, and he looks at least a decade older than me, quite tall really. And I find him staring at me quite a lot while I'm walking through the aisles where I'm shopping, just taking glances. This happened twice or thrice, and then he starts walking up to me casually and asking questions like, "Oh, how are you?" He doesn't seem to come to me when I'm with my friend, but when I'm alone, I find him lingering around. One day, he just gave me a free snack, and I said no, but he handed it over to me and then left. The next day he asked if I have a job and if I'm married, and he kind of gets excited when I tell him that I'm a developer and I'm single. He doesn't speak English, and he proceeds to say something in Hindi, which I'm not really good at, so I try asking him what he said, and he says something but I don't understand. Also, there have been instances where he would step out of the store and watch me while I'm sitting in the car until I leave. He just smirks and keeps looking at me. I'm a shy introvert, and I'm really bad at avoiding conversations. I always talk nice regardless of who it is. But what should I do now? Does this mean he's interested in me? How do I politely handle this? He kinda knows who I usually shop with, and I don't want to make it an awkward situation for my friends. Am I just overreacting? To clarify, I'm not interested in this person, and I always smile and talk, but maybe that's sending him the wrong signals. This is giving me a not so good feeling. I could stop going to that store But that doesn't seem right. The fact that I have to avoid a public space because of a man makes me feel pathetic, but I understand in terms of safety. Maybe I can always go with someone there if I have to. Not sure if that's the right thing. Like, it's the only Indian grocery store around, and this situation is an inconvenience at this point. I hope anyone that has been through something like this is or are in a better situation with peace. It definitely makes it awkward to get unwanted attention from random people. Update. I'm never going back to that store. I had to go today to get a few things for my friend. She had surgery and she didn't want to come along. She's fine to go out, but I dragged her with me. She hadn't noticed that man all these months. I've been going to the store alone for the past couple of weeks. So, he was just openly flirty today. He used to avoid approaching me if I'm with someone, but that wasn't the case today. He was outside the store when we had reached there, and he smiled at us and went inside. Then he stood at the entrance to get a close-up, and then he leaned towards me and then said hi. Obviously, a lot of people noticed, including my friend, that he kept smiling and looking at me all the time. The store manager was there, and he didn't seem to bother. After we reached back home, I told my friend that I'm never going back there. I asked her if I was just overreacting, and she said no. Today was subtle because I was with her. He didn't talk much, otherwise, he would be standing in front of me asking personal questions. My friend said that she won't take me there for the longest and decided to only go there if we were a group of 3 or more with guys from our circle of friends. This all started about a month ago, starting innocently enough that I just didn't really care too much. I live in a townhouse, and my neighbor who I shared a wall with has had someone recently move in with him, a man who I assume is his brother. The first instance was me laying in bed reading, and I can hear some slight breathing or a general sense that I am being listened to. This escalated through the next few weeks, with this man masturbating nearly every night when my window was open. I would look outside quickly to see who it was, and I could never get a glimpse of this person, and I was so confused on how they could scale the 6-foot fence back in my yard that quickly. From that, it escalated to him masturbating at all hours of the day on random days. On the days he did it, he would be all day by my bedroom window, my living room window, and kitchen window downstairs on opposite sides of the house. I thought I was losing it. Like, are there more than one person? How does this person run away so fast? But I was just like, whatever, I'm a man too, so I didn't feel particularly threatened, and I had a bat in each room just in case. But this is when shit went sideways last night. The masturbating was on another level, and I kept hearing breathing in my basement, and it sounded like someone was in the walls. I kept running to the windows and downstairs, looking everywhere. And again, I could never find this person. This whole night, I thought I was losing my shit. I was extra vigilant, listening in silence in my room. And then I heard it. The man was walking on my roof and peering over where my window was in my bedroom. I freaked out and I pushed my attic, and thank God he was not inside the attic, but opening it allowed me to hear his footsteps on the outside roof crystal clear. Every time someone would be walking on his side and potentially see him, he would run back to the other side and hide. And I called my brother to come and try and get a picture of him. Well, now I know I'm not crazy, because I can hear him perfectly clear. And on top of that, I can hear him perfectly clear and run back into my neighbor's house when he gets too spooked. Well, this is really the scary part. I have a very small window in the basement in a pretty old house that I had absolutely no idea was even able to be opened. Turns out, it can and was unlocked. This man has been in my basement for God knows how many times. For some reason, I don't feel particularly that scared. I have a feeling that he is disabled or something, and I feel bad for him. He makes weird noises like an autistic person might, and I've seen his hand opening the back door, seeing me, and then running back inside, and it was really dirty. I think he is scared of me because he ran so fast in the house when he saw me in the backyard. So I said out loud to him that if he doesn't stop going on my roof or entering my damn house, that I'm going to tell his brother and the cops potentially. I'm totally assuming this, but I have a feeling that the brother took him in because he had nowhere to go and is disabled in some way. So I'm kinda scared that he is going to kick him out. Now all my windows are locked top and bottom, and it's almost winter, so at least I don't mind to keep windows shut. But yes, there's a very creepy compulsive masturbating on my hand. This happened to me when I was around 11 or so. I'm a female in my early 30s now, and my mother actually explained the situation to me when I got older and understood better. The neighborhood that I grew up in was a fairly nice one. Almost everyone knew each other, especially our family, because my parents had an in-ground pool installed, so we had lots of people over and had pool parties. I loved it because we always had big birthday parties for me and my two older siblings. Our house sat a little higher than others, being that it was on a bit of a hill. We had a chain link fence all around with gates on the sides so that people could just go straight to the backyard. There was a set of stairs that led up to the wooden patio going around the pool, almost leveled with it, with a table and a canopy set on it. It was always fun waking up, going swimming till around noon. Then my mom would bring us lunch, and then we would sit out there and eat. Our neighbor on one side had two kids. Their youngest was a year older than me, but we always hung out, and the oldest was the same age as my brother. Directly behind us was just a bunch of dense trees, like a small forest, and on the other side was a single guy. We'll call him Frank. Everyone looked older as a kid, but I think he was maybe in his 30s or 40s, and Frank was always nice to us kids in the neighborhood. He gave the best candy at Halloween. He was way too skinny to be Santa, but he still dressed up like one and handed out little gifts to us too. He came to our pool parties and cookouts just like anyone else. When he would go swimming with us, he and my dad would put us kids on their shoulders, and we would try to knock each other off. He would toss us in the water or watch us dive or swim like we were racing. He had a dog too, a collie I believe. She was so pretty, so when I wanted to walk around but couldn't go far, I'd just walk over to see her. He would let her go out back with me or let me play with her in his living room until I was called home. So, all around, Frank was a pretty nice and trusting guy. As I got a little older, as mentioned, around 11, I started having more friends over for sleepovers and parties. When this happened, we would have a full reign of the pool. My sister and her friends may be there, but my brother was not, so we could have our own time. We would be rowdy and loud at times, jumping into the pool, screaming and laughing, but all in all, it was fun. A few times we would see Frank walking out to get his mail and he would stop. He would look over, smiling and wave at us, and then continue on. He would make jokes sometimes about us being loud, but all in fun, but that was about it. There were a few times where he actually tossed some water toys over to us, like a beach ball or dive rings that he bought for us. And I remember him saying one time to me and my friends, "So you girls don't get bored in the water?" I didn't really think anything of it at that time, and neither did my friends. It just gave us reasons to keep swimming. There were a few times when Frank was at our place, and I would get out of the pool to go get something from inside, or if I mentioned that I wanted to go swimming, he would end up leaving shortly after, saying that he had things to do. I remember this because he used to tease me about leaving footprints for my mom to clean up, or racing me to the pool, but then he stopped and instead just went home. It was something that I grew to expect, so when he stopped, it threw me off for a while. One summer, Frank had a private fence installed. It wasn't that unusual to me because a lot of neighboring houses started doing the same, but I remember my dad saying that it was going to stick out at that time because all the other houses had the metal ones, including ours. When my dad talked to him about it, he mentioned making the cost of the house higher with a better fence as well. After he put it up though, we would see him looking over the top of his fence, doing what he normally did, waving and then shouting over at us. One time, he hollered over for me while me and my friends were swimming, and then he motioned me over to the fence. I climbed out of the pool, made my way to the fence, and he asked me what the occasion was. I said that I just had some friends over for the weekend, and I noticed that he seemed to be out of breath, and I asked if he was all right. He said he was, and that he just wanted to give me something. And after a few seconds of him looking down, he handed over these floating horse things that were basically pool noodles, and he said that we could use these things for our water fights when we couldn't be on his shoulders. I remember taking them, pretty excited about it, and I thanked him. He was just smiling as I walked back to get in the pool. He stood there for a few more seconds. I got back into the pool until my friend noticed him and asked if he was just going to watch us the whole time. I looked over at him and thanked him, and then he went inside. I remember some of these so clearly now because it's not until afterwards that you realize everything wrong. This continued for the next year. He'd come over less and less, and when he was already over, hanging out back with my dad or something, and I would mention swimming, he'd end up leaving soon after I got in. Him asking me to go over to the fence became a regular occurrence, and he would either give me something or just delay the conversation, like, "How are you? How was school? Any summer plans? Any friends coming over?" Weird questions like that. And at one point, I asked him why he didn't just stay over and talk and swim. His answers were always the same, saying that he had stuff to do or something came up. But the other running occurrence was that he always seemed out of breath, red in the face and sweating. Sometimes, he had even taken his shirt off, which would normally be fine, except for when he goes home from our house saying he has things to do, but now standing in his yard and talking to me. Another time, when I was swimming with my sister and her friend, they were about 17 or 18 at that time, and he shouted for us, and when my sister started getting up to go, he would yell that he wanted me specifically. As a kid normally does, I got annoyed with this because it was almost every time that I was swimming. Not my sister, not my brother, but me. One of the last few times he did this was when the three of us kids were swimming one evening. The sun was just starting to set and my mom had called us in for dinner. My siblings got out, leaving me with the responsibility of picking up all the toys and games since I wasn't ready to get out yet. And lo and behold, as I'm getting out, Frank is yelling for me. I told him that I had to go, and he said that it would be real quick. So I finished up and I walked over to the fence again, where Frank is breathing fast and sweaty. He smiled at me and asked how I was and said that he had something for me. He hadn't given any gifts in a while, so I lightened up a bit and asked what it was. He looked down again, taking deep breaths, and I asked again if he was okay. He slowly looked up and then handed me a pack of glow-in-the-dark dive rings and sticks. He said they were for swimming at night and asked if I ever did. I said thank you, but I also explained that my parents only let my sister swim at night since she was older, unless they were out there with me. But he said to ask my parents if I can, since I'm plenty mature enough. And then he winked at me. I didn't feel good at this point. Being a kid, I didn't really know the whole trust your gut thing, and I just stood there listening and saying that I would, looking down at the gift. He then thought that it would be alright to say, "Then you could also skinny dip like your sister does, but I won't tell anyone." And he let out a creepy giggle. I just remember saying okay or something and then taking off inside. At this point, I definitely felt like something was wrong and I didn't really quite know what he meant by that. So I ate my dinner quietly with little to anyone bothering me. My mom asked if I was alright and I just said that I wasn't feeling good at that time. When it got closer to bed, I was in my sister's room because she was braiding my hair and she asked me what was wrong too. I asked her about skinny dipping and if she did it. We were pretty close, so I trusted her, and I recall her turning red and explaining to me what it was, and she said she only did it once as a dare and not to tell our parents. But then she asked me why or how I knew, and she was not going to let me leave her room till I told her. And for that I am thankful. I explained everything to her, what Frank had said that night, all his gifts and how weird he was acting at the fence. I was scared because she actually had tears in her eyes, so I thought that I was in trouble. She said it would be okay and that I could leave. She comforted me though, telling me that I wasn't in trouble, and so I left. The last thing that I remember was my parents telling me goodnight, and then a crazy next morning. Turns out that my sister actually went and told my parents everything. Of course, she told on herself, but that was the least of their concerns. The next morning when I woke up, there were police at our house and my mom, dad, and sister were talking to them. My mom noticed that I woke up and then ushered me to the kitchen for breakfast. From there, I had to talk to the cops or these detective-like people, and then I'd tell them the same thing that I told my sister. From there, not much was said to me. I was told that Frank had to leave and we never saw him again. I know now that this was my parents' way of protecting me by not telling me what actually happened, which I was thankful for, so that I could continue having a normal childhood. I was told when I got older, though, that he was definitely arrested. They found plenty of evidence in his house alone, but I was horrified to learn what he was most likely doing behind that fence. It was an awful feeling and an awful memory to think back on. I even went in this creep's house alone. I don't blame my parents though. This guy had lived there when I was a toddler, so it was a shock that this was who he was. We got a privacy fence soon after, and my parents were more careful about who they let around us in our home too. So this was quite a while ago. I would say about 11 to 12 when this happened. One night, we had decided to get food from a pizza place around us That was close, but not close enough that they would deliver to us. It was about 20 to 30 minutes away. The trip there was fine. We got our food and we were on our way home. But then we decided to stop at a gas station. When leaving the gas station, a dark burgundy car pulled out behind us. At first, obviously, this did not raise any red flags to us. But as we kept going and getting closer to home, this car was still following us and we were starting to get freaked out. It followed us the whole way home, and once we got home, we pulled in and this car just stopped in the middle of the road a bit behind us. My mom told me not to get out of the car, and we sat there for about 10 minutes until this car finally decided to drive past us. I was so scared, I didn't even look at the car because I didn't want to see who was in it. They turned at the next block, and then my mom told me to get out of the car and run to the house as fast as I could because she was worried that they were just going to drive around the block. We got out, ran to the house and locked the door. I don't know if they ever came back, and I never saw that car again. It was one of the creepiest things to ever happen to us. This is the first time that I've sent a story in. My life has been pretty boring in comparison to other people, but I hope that my story is something you can use. The doctor told me that I needed to start exercising more because of my health. But where I live, it gets extremely hot during the day, even during winter, so working out at nighttime is easier. I was still too embarrassed to go to the gym to exercise because I didn't want to be judged. I decided to go for walks at nighttime when it was cooler and there would be fewer people out. Even then, there were still other people out, and while it may have been safer, I still felt really self-conscious. So on a whim, I decided to go for a walk at 1 a.m., so technically it was the early morning. This was also quite a long time ago. I didn't have a mobile phone that I could take with me. I went for my walk and naturally there wasn't anyone around. And over time, I was getting used to it and I enjoyed my night walks. My neighborhood is normally quiet and has a reputation for being one of those safe ones. I walked a good distance away from my house and the occasional car drove by. Occasionally, I'd get a honk of hello by one of my neighbors and I would wave back. There were some parked cars along both sides of the street. Again, there was nothing abnormal that drew my attention or caused me to worry. I continued on my way when I saw a car slowly driving behind me. The lights were on and I gave a wave thinking that it was someone who knew me and perhaps they decided to play a prank on me. But I had a terrible feeling that they didn't have good intentions toward me. So I tried to stay in well-lit areas where I would be safe. I was about halfway home and I wanted to get home as soon as possible. I didn't want to lead whoever this was back to my house, just in case they decided to come back later on or whenever they wanted to. There was a local gas station nearby that's open 24 hours and I started to walk in the direction of it. I knew that there would be someone in there and that I'd be able to get some help. I kept checking behind me and the car kept following me. I tried changing directions to see what the person would do and they changed lanes and kept following me. I saw a glimpse of a man in the car, but I couldn't really distinguish any of his facial features. I was beginning to get increasingly scared now, but I kept a level head. I walked to the gas station, I entered, and I spoke to the man behind the counter. I then explained to him that a car had been following me. We looked for the car, and it was gone. Well, at first, I was so relieved, but it was only when we looked around the corner that we saw the car, waiting for me to come out, and the lights were off this time, and clearly he was hiding. The man was so kind and called the police for me. I waited, and I bought some snacks. I know, counterproductive to my diet, but I needed the comfort because I was so nervous. I'm not sure how long it took for the police to come, but when they came, the other car drove away and I never saw them again. I still went on my regular walks, but I ended up going with a friend to keep me company and also for safety reasons. And I never leave without a mobile phone in case of an emergency, and I bought one soon after this happened. There was an update on the car that was following me. The car was stolen. There were women who were walking who had gone missing in the neighboring towns, who were just grabbed when they were walking either early in the morning or late at night. There were rumors that it was a serial killer of some kind, but since no bodies were found at this point, we really can't be sure whether this was true or not. From what I heard about these women, they weren't the sort to just get up and leave their families behind. So yeah, it probably isn't good. Update. Hi, sorry about the second email. I wanted to give you an update about my story, and I haven't heard it on your channel yet. One of the missing women who went out for a late walk has been found deceased and likely the victim of murder. The others who have gone missing haven't been found yet. There isn't anything specific to say that it was the same person or if it was connected, but it made me wonder what could have happened. So, I guess going to the gas station was a good idea. Everyone, please, stay safe out there. Hey, okay, I'm not sure how to begin this. This isn't one of those, "Oh, he looked at me funny in the grocery store, let's not meet" kind of story. My life was actually in danger, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it out alive. I hate those stories where someone is looking at someone strangely, and that ends up being their story. I live on a property in a rural country town. It isn't close to the town itself and is about 15 to 20 minutes away. I can't see my neighbor's house, and they certainly can't see mine. The property is about 100 acres of land, some bushland with some paddocks, and a small garden close to the house. We have 3 guard dogs to alert and, well, to bite anyone who gets too close. And even though I'm an adult, my parents don't like leaving me at home alone at night. And before this happened, I thought that they were just being ridiculous and overprotective of me. I was settling in for the night with a movie, some popcorn, and I was waiting for a friend to come meet me. We have gates, but they're mostly left unpadlocked. Basically, the unspoken rule is if you open a gate, you close it. Mainly, so livestock doesn't get out of the paddocks. Anyway, sorry, you'll find that I tend to ramble a lot. My friend texted me to tell me that she would be running a little late. This really isn't uncommon for her. She is terrible at time management. I settled down in front of the TV. Then I heard the dogs barking. They're idiots and sometimes will bark at a mob of kangaroos jumping past, or I thought they were just excited because my friend got here. But it was aggressive, and I heard a loud yelp. I got up, and I got my crowbar ready, and I peeked out the window. I saw my dog running back to the house, limping, and I opened the front door to let him in. He was bleeding. Oh, it was on. I didn't immediately call the police because 1, it would take them a long time to get out here, and 2, I didn't want to call them if it was a feral dog or something. They will never let me live it down. It looked like someone stabbed him, but it didn't look like it hit any vital organs. I wrapped towels around him, hugged him, and I told him that it would be okay. I was starting to get really scared. When I looked back, there was a scruffy and dirty looking man standing at the window looking in. This wasn't uncommon. People would go for a walk in the bush, not understand how to get back, and then follow the nearest road. It was weird how he didn't call out and didn't look like he had been stuck outside for a while. I asked him, "Are you all right, mate?" He knocked again and said, "Can I come in?" Now, normally, if my family were home, we would do it and call the police, then the cops would drive them home or wherever. I didn't want to let a random man in the house though. My dog then started barking and snarling. He has a scary bark and it tends to keep people away. "Do you need me to call the cops, mate?" My tone was a lot less friendly and concerned this time. "No, don't call the cops. Let me in. I want to come in," he demanded, and then shook the doorknob roughly. "Fuck off," I said, and I picked up the phone and then called the police. Now, even if the cops left immediately, it would still take them a good amount of time to get to the property, and the creepy leer on the man's face told me that he must have known that too. The operator answered me, and I told her that I needed the police and there was a man trying to break into my house. But he then broke the glass with something in his hands and then tried to open the lock. I screamed and I backed up and then ran toward the back of the house and opened the door to run out. I hated leaving my dog locked in another room, but he was able to grab my arm and then yank me backward. He said something to me, but I couldn't quite make it out. We struggled for a while and he tried to pull open my shirt and I screamed, punching, biting, and kicking him. I wasn't gonna go down without a fight. My dog burst through the door, the little legend. Even when he was injured, he still came to help me. He grabbed his arm, bit down, and then shook. The man screamed so loud, and I punched the man repeatedly in his head. I didn't want to kill him. When he was on the ground, I pulled my dog off of him, and then we sat nearby. I held the knife in my hand, and I hugged my dog. He was bleeding, but it wasn't lethal. As I thought, it took the cops a while to come out. The ambulance came too, and then took care of us. He woke up, told them that I went crazy and my dog was vicious. They didn't believe him. My parents panicked when they got home, but they were happy that I handled myself. We pressed charges against him and testified. And Chief, my dog and my savior, got stitched up and is still kicking. He gets treats all the time and is spoiled rotten. We upped the security at the house just in case that it ever happens again. Well, I doubt it. But we have cameras around the place and motion lights in case that some stranger ever tries to pay us a visit. The other dogs, unfortunately, were terrible guard dogs, but that's okay. They're still beloved pets. As for the idiot who attacked me, he is in prison, and I hope that every single day he has in there is total misery. I've been a long-time listener to podcasts where people have told their scary stories or told about creepy encounters and whatnot, but I never personally expected to have one of my own. And now that I do have one, I figured, why not share it with the world and see if maybe it can be used as a lesson to others and help people avoid similar events. If nothing else, at least it can be considered entertainment to some. I live in a small town that I like to think is pretty safe. There really aren't many crimes that I hear about around town, and I've never really met anyone that I felt threatened by around town. I've been without a car for a while now, and I just walk from my house to a nearby bus stop to get to work, and then I do the same to get home. The bus stop to get home is a bit annoying because they don't stop at the same spot where they pick me up in the morning, so I end up having to walk about 25 minutes from the second stop to my apartment complex. It's a bit annoying, sure, but it is what it is. And since I don't have a car, it's all I have to rely on most of the time. Now, this whole event happened a few weeks ago. It was a normal day at work. I was super busy, and by the end of the day, I was seriously exhausted. I got to my stop, got on the bus, and I was sitting in the seat just kind of dozing off a bit while making sure that I didn't actually fall asleep. Something that I've gotten pretty good at over the couple of years that I've done this routine. And after a bit of just sitting there and being rocked back and forth by the jostling of the bus, we hit a pothole, and the bump of it actually pulled me completely out of my half-asleep state. I shook my head and kind of looked around. And when I did, I noticed that there was a guy a few seats ahead of me that was sitting with his back against the side of the wall of the bus, and he was staring at me. I don't mean like, maybe he has a crush on me type of staring. I mean, full-on glaring, like I stole his wallet and kicked his dog and he knew that it was me style of staring. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'd never seen him on this bus route before. I was a bit creeped out by it, so I just kind of thought, okay, I'll ignore it the best that I can, and that will be it. He's just kind of creepy. The entire ride to my stop, he just sat there staring at me with the same wide-eyed glare, and it got to the point where I thought that maybe he was blind and he wasn't actually staring at me, and maybe I was just being insensitive. It was such an awkward situation, and I really was trying to rationalize or think about it in any logical or even illogical way that I could. And after a while, we were approaching my stop. I was a bit hesitant to get off, but I wasn't about to make my 20-something minute walk turn into a 40 or more minute walk just because of this one guy. As we approached, I got up and I walked towards the exit of the bus, and as I passed this guy, he definitely turned his head to watch me. And much to my misfortune, as I got past his seat, he stood up and started following me. I had no idea what to do. I had already shown that this was my stop by getting up, and there weren't a lot of people on the bus, so it wasn't like I was going to be able to get anyone to help me. I decided that I could maybe mention something to the driver and they could help me about it, or stop this guy from getting off the bus with me because I was creeped out. I really was at a loss of what could be done because technically, him being a creep wasn't a crime. The second that I turned to make a comment to the driver, this guy grabbed my shirt and then pushed me toward the door, and I'm not exaggerating. He practically threw me off the bus. He grabbed me and then he shoved me with all his strength out the doors and onto the curb. I was lucky that I was able to halfway catch myself and that I didn't smack my head on the bus stop sign or the bench or anything. As I fell, this guy seriously pointed at me and said, "If I ever catch you on this bus again, I will kill you." This was obviously terrifying, and it caused a lot of chaos to ensue, mostly from the driver. He was yelling at the guy, and the couple other people that were on the bus were standing up and approaching this man that had just threatened me, and that I was just sitting there terrified for my life. As soon as the other people got to the guy, he jumped off the bus and then he took off at a full sprint. Within moments he was gone, and they were helping me up, and the driver told me to get back on the bus while he called the cops to escort me home. I was thankful that he let me back on to wait and that he was willing to call into dispatch that there was an incident, so I wasn't there alone. The cops did come and they asked for a description. They asked me if I knew the guy, and I told them the whole thing, that he was staring at me creepily, and then when I went to get off the bus, he shoved me and then threatened me. They didn't seem to want to believe that I didn't know the dude, but I assured them that I had never seen him before in my life. They took all the information from everyone, and then one of the officers actually did give me a ride home. That's pretty much the end of it. They haven't contacted me to let me know if there's been any progress. And my guess is that there wouldn't be, because it was such a random incident, and beyond the description, I don't know if they had anything else on this guy. It definitely scared the hell out of me, and it's actually made me a bit nervous to ride the bus again, just in case he makes good on his threat. But I'm hopeful that it was just a one-off incident, and that I never run into that crazy dude ever again. This story takes place several years ago, in the early mid-2000s. I think it was 2006, because at that time, I was living with my aunt and uncle in the middle of pretty much nowhere Midwest. I won't get into the whole why I was living with them thing, because it's not really relevant to the story. Just know that I had crappy parents, and they were the next best thing, but they really did live in what was pretty much the middle of nowhere. The town, if you could call it that we lived in had a really small population, and pretty much everyone knew everyone else. It was basically one of those small towns where if you pulled into someone's driveway, you would get met with the business end of a double barrel. On top of this, they lived on what was basically a long dirt road that literally just ended. There were no turnarounds or side roads. It was just one long dirt path with gravel on it that went the length of a few properties and then stopped at a tree line. It didn't even have one of those metal guardrails to stop you at the end. It was just a forest and a small ravine pretty much. This meant that the people that came down the road were typically just the people that lived there, or maybe were visiting someone that lived there. Very rarely did we get someone that would drive all the way down the road, find that it just ended, and then turn around to go somewhere else. Now that you have an idea of what it was like, I'll get on to what actually happened. I was 16 at that time and had recently gotten my driver's license, so I was the one that drove to the only gas station to get snacks, or would drive out to the grocery store to pick up the few things we needed. I was pretty much just taking every single opportunity that I could get to get into the car and then go, since I now legally could. This was especially true since it was summer break, because otherwise, I would just be sitting in the house with my little brother, and that was not something that I wanted to do. It was pretty early in the morning, sometime around 8 or so, because my uncle had just gotten up and was complaining that we were out of both creamer and milk for his coffee, and that he was getting grumpy because of it. I told him that I would go ahead and run to the store to get what he needed if he wanted to. He said that I could go, but then told me to take Jimmy, my little brother. I really didn't want to, but I wasn't going to fight him on it. So we got in the car, headed out down the drive and onto the road toward the main roads. A few minutes into the drive, I saw what looked like a car sitting on the side of the road with a hood up, which is also something that you don't usually see around here. I slowed down as we approached it, and I saw a man in a button-down shirt and nice pants, just kind of standing there in front of the car, looking at it like he was annoyed or frustrated. I asked him if he was okay, and he laughed, and then he walked over to my window. And here's how the conversation went. He said, "No, I'm not okay. I was driving down the road and this thing just stopped running. I don't know what's wrong with it. You wouldn't happen to have a phone that I could use, would you?" I answered, "No, I don't. I'm sorry. Were you going to see someone down this way? I could point you to their house and they could help you." Mind you, this was 2006, and most people didn't have cell phones on them at that time, much less out here. He then answered, "That's all right. Could you give me a ride up the road to the gas station so I could call someone? It's just me out here, and I don't really know where I am." This was a bit of a weird statement. He definitely looked out of place, but to be on this road usually meant that you knew where you were going. I told him, "This is my uncle's car and I don't really think he'd want me to have a stranger in it. What I can do though, let me turn around and go get him and let him know where you are so he can come out this way. He actually owns a mechanic shop, so he can either tell you what's wrong or get you towed out to the shop, and I'm sure he'll be able to fix it." But when I said this, he kind of looked upset or disappointed, which was weird to me because I was basically offering to get him a certified mechanic to look at his car for free since he was stuck here. My uncle had been working on cars for something like 30 years at this point, and there was nothing that he couldn't diagnose or fix at his shop. The guy kind of just looked around and shook his head and then leaned in and said, "Could you guys just go ahead and give me a ride? I think that would be the better way to do this." That's when my brother leaned forward and started talking. He asked, "Is that guy with you too?" and pointed towards the trees by the car. The guy looked shocked and then turned around to look at the trees, then asked in a sheepish way, "Oh, what guy?" My brother once again pointed and said, "That guy right there, behind that tree. He's been standing there for a while now. Does he need a ride too?" Now, my brother can be a bit annoying at times with how he was, but this was practically the thing that saved us in this situation. And as soon as the guy realized that we knew that the other guy was there, he didn't really seem to know what to say. And after a couple seconds of mumbling and jumping around with his words, he seemed to motion to the other guy, and as soon as I saw him start walking out of the trees with a gun in his hands, I booked it. I knew exactly what was going on here, and I knew that I needed to get as far away from this as quickly as I could. I slammed the gas pedal, and then I took off. I'm pretty sure that I actually ran over the first guy's foot on the way. After what felt like forever of driving down the road at top speed, I looked back, slowed down, and turned out onto the main road where everything was. When I finally parked in the parking lot of the grocery store, I just kind of sat there with my heart racing and panicking inside. My brother, on the other hand, was just like, "Huh? That was weird." When I was certain that I wasn't going to die from a heart attack, we got out and quickly ran into the store. I went over to the desk and asked to use their phone to call my uncle. I told him that some guys were parked on our street and one of them had a gun and that they tried to carjack us. I honestly think that they were more likely trying to kidnap us and take the car too, but I just stuck with carjacking. He then told me to stay there until he got up to the store, that he was going to call the cops. When the officer got to the store, my brother and I told him about the whole thing, and we told them about the car, the guy, and the other guy with a gun. They did a sweep of the area, but they never found any of them. My uncle said that he didn't seem to see them either when he drove down the road. My guess is that they took off when we did because they knew that the cops would be there soon. It was bizarre for them to do this in the middle of a rural area, on a road where it's just a bunch of country folk. But at the same time, I guess if you have the patience, you could get a mark pretty easily, since people out that way are always willing to stop and help. It was the only time there were any reports of anything like this, and I never saw the two guys again, which tells me that they weren't from around there. Honestly, I hope that I never do see them again. I never liked the outdoors or being in nature, and I get a lot of shit for this. I prefer to stay inside in a nice AC with all the comforts of home, rather than go outside where there is nothing but bugs, the heat, and people. I appreciate beautiful nature pictures and the scenery, but that doesn't mean that I want to be out in it. My sister, however, is the complete opposite of me. She loves the outdoors and always tries to go hiking whenever she can. I like seeing the pictures and hearing about her adventures, but that is as far as I will ever go. But for her birthday, she asked me to go on an easy hike with her. We have different ideas about what an easy hike would be. She doesn't really ask much of me, so I told her that I would give it a go, but to understand that I might not be able to do it. We were walking along the path, and we stopped regularly to take breaks. It was a beautiful place, but my feet hurt. It wasn't really my thing. We had one more trail to go down before we'd go down another one in order to get back to the car park. My sister was talking about how we should do this again sometime. I just wanted to go through the day. We weren't alone on the trails. There were families with small kiddos walking by, some couples, older people, and even the odd occasional single hiker. What I'm trying to say is that this trail isn't in the middle of nowhere and generally has the reputation for being safe. Well, I hurt my ankle somehow. I don't know how, but it ached. So my sister and I sat down for a while and chatted. And before we knew it, it was dusk. So the sky had that pink hue to it, and it was colder now. We got up and then started walking home. My legs and ankle hurt, so I was limping, and my sister was walking beside me. I knew she was itching to walk faster. She is one of those speedy people who like to walk really fast everywhere. But then we heard rustling from the trees, and then froze. Neither of us knew what it was, and we held each other's hand only for a deer to come through. You know, like a cheesy part in a horror movie. We just laughed it off and thought that it was ridiculous. But then, the birds, and just the forest in general, I guess, went really quiet. It was weird. My sister stopped and looked around to see what was causing it. She leaned close to me and whispered that we had to go. Now, I wasn't going to argue with her. Instantly, she was on her feet and pulled me up quickly. I asked her what was wrong and she told me not to worry. Just come with her and don't waste any time. We walked at a fast pace, as fast as we could go with my injury in order to get back to the car park, and she wouldn't say what was wrong. I didn't ask again, and I figured that she would tell me when we were safe. She kept looking to see what was there, and as we were getting closer to the car, she told me to hurry up and just get straight in the car when it was unlocked. When we got back to the car, she told me to get in right away, and the moment we were inside, we lock all the doors. Normally, when we got back to the car after doing something, we would just talk or relax, but this time, she drove off and didn't answer my question until we drove to a local McDonald's. She pulled into a parking spot and her hands were shaking. I gave her a moment before I asked her what happened. She told me that she saw someone was watching us in the forest behind a tree. At first I thought she was overreacting because there were a lot of people there. She told me that he was naked and that he had a knife in his hand, and that's why she told me that we had to go. I asked her how she knew that it was a knife, and she said that she knew it got bright when it reflected, and then admitted that she couldn't be sure. It was just better to get out of there before it got dark anyway, than being out there when it was nighttime. Maybe we were being stalked by a psycho, or maybe a murderer. I don't know. I haven't gone hiking since, and my ankle has gotten better. She has gone hiking again with friends, but never going alone. But she has never tried to go back to that forest. She told me that she doesn't want anyone to stop her from enjoying nature. I'm a female and I'm currently 31, but this happened when I was 16. I was in a choir at my high school that performed for a lot of different events around town. One of them was to sing at the middle school sporting events. The middle school in my hometown, there is only one, is just about half a mile from my childhood home. So whenever we had events there, I would just walk. I didn't really get my license till 17. This one night, I think it was November, we had to sing at a basketball game, and it was obviously dark when I was able to leave. Normally, I wasn't allowed to walk alone at night, but for choir, I was given permission unless I felt unsafe. But there wasn't any reason to be creeped out in the first place, so I started my walk. Just down from the middle school is a stretch of road with almost no streetlights that had always creeped me out when I walked there. I crossed quickly, and I had a fast pace going, as I'm a naturally paranoid human. But about 2 minutes into the dark zone, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I at first figured that it was a jogger, but they made no attempt to pass me and they just stayed a comfortable 10-foot distance. They began whistling a jaunty tune, which at first I thought was fun. At this point, I wasn't super scared, perhaps because of the happy whistling tune, but I noticed that the footsteps began to speed up. There were no cars on the road, and given the lack of light, when I turned around all I could see was a silhouette shrouded in darkness. At that realization, I quickened my pace to barely under a run. The whistling continued, getting more breathless as this person began to run after me. I looked back to see a dark figure coming at me at full speed, and in terror, I began to run frantically as well. I will never forget those last moments running through my dark subdivision, hearing his whistling and footsteps getting closer and closer. This person followed me up to my door, and I ran inside and locked the front. I checked all the doors and went to my upstairs bedroom. And from the window, I could still see a silhouette and could still hear him whistling. I slept with a knife that night. So this happened years ago when I was a dumb teen girl who loved walking the city alone after dark. This took place in Eastern Europe and, for context, in a city with a tramway system. On this one night, I sat in a tram station waiting to catch the last tram home. 3 trams stopped at the station, 2 of which went where I was going. This information would be important for later. It was around 10 p.m., and as I sat there waiting, lost in thought, I barely registered a man quietly walking up and then standing by the shelter. I thought nothing of it, just someone else waiting for the tram. Until I started feeling weird. The streets were quiet and dark and there was no one else in sight, just me and this guy. And I started wondering why he chose to stand this close to me when he had so much space to avoid dealing with people. I couldn't comprehend anyone wanting to socialize this late at night, given that I was not very social myself. So I glanced at him, trying not to overthink. He was a bald-headed, beady-eyed giant, tall, built like a bear, big belly, and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away or act embarrassed. No. This guy wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky, cold shivers down my spine. This was not normal. I realized quickly that I was not in a good situation. I couldn't miss the last tram. Walking home was out of the question, and my phone was almost dead. I was a shy kid, and I didn't have what it takes to scare this guy away. I knew that, but I had to at least try. I only managed to utter a small "Hi?" trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking. But my attempt failed in the face of his silent, threatening aura. He kept staring, no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside of me, I told myself to stay calm and then think rationally. Maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed, and his stare continued to burn onto my skin, and there was no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't also work. So I mustered the courage to speak once again, this time a little louder. "What do you want? Stop staring!" No answer. He definitely heard me this time. I felt myself start to get angry. I didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that this behavior didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and I forced myself to start thinking. I knew what I can't do. I can't fight him off if he makes a move, and there is nothing I can say or do that will get him to stop. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew that they weren't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow. I could run, but he would most likely catch up to me before I can tire him out, since his legs were much longer than mine. And even if I managed to somehow lose him, walking home through dark alleys, past the junkies and the gypsies that were always prowling about, could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much sooner if he felt threatened. So, what can I do? The only thing that I could be able to do was to try and outsmart him somehow. So, I started developing a few plans, depending on which tram showed up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for a tram too, or popped over for other more suspicious reasons, and whether I could get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me, I'd have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy available, and for that, I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking, the first tram showed up. It was one that I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right in my neighborhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped that he would board it and leave me be, but he didn't. He kept watching me carefully. So I let the tram go, desperately hoping that it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he was quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and I just ride to the next station, getting off as soon as possible so I don't end up too far and miss the tram that I need. This tram showed up next, and with my heart in my throat, I boarded it and I sat down by the door. He got on it too, but he sat himself in the back, pretty far from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking that this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping that it was all over. But when I stepped on the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly, and I was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly pissed off. He stopped just a few steps away and then resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He was not going to let me go. The helplessness that I felt was unbearable, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now, if I didn't, was becoming too real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regrets, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not have to think anymore, not have to fight back the tears, and stay composed. But I knew this would be his cue to enact whatever messed up plan that he had in his mind, and I couldn't let that happen. Then, I saw the final tram approach, the only one that I could take now, and I got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloping me, my mind snapped out of its nightmarish spiral of fear and allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old man, blissfully unaware of my distress. Getting the driver's attention was a no-go. And then we passed one stop. There was no one else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around fully expecting to see the psycho that had followed me again. But I did not expect him to be sitting right behind me. He was not taking any chances. He was making sure that I won't try anything like last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. I stood up and purposely walked over to another seat in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear that I will not put up with this bullshit any longer. He got up too and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind and diagonally from me, and then sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face. Already expecting it, I shut up and stood by the middle door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he won't have any idea which station I plan to get off at. He remained where he was this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram, and there was nothing else that I could possibly do to escape now. He must have reckoned, so my defiance was just a funny act to him. This was my chance. I had to take the risk, and it had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and stayed open for around 5 seconds before closing again if no buttons were pressed or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine, came into view. The tram slowed to a stop, the doors opened, and I made no move. 5 long seconds passed, and the doors started to close. I bolted and I ran for it, reaching the back door as fast as I could and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body tense with adrenaline, I waited a long, painful second, and then I jumped back in, keeping my head low, holding my breath and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and I exhaled slowly while thanking the gods that I didn't believe in for that button working. I was wishing with all my might for him to not have seen me before I got back in. And as I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still on the tram, face screwed up in anger, head turning like a fat, ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared to myself, imagining his face when he realized he fucked up. Hand on my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner and found no one looking back. I stood up in excitement and I threw myself at the foggy back window. And there he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leaving him and his vile plans behind. Giving someone the middle finger never felt so good. I made it home and told no one of my story, for fear that I'd be admonished for my naivety. But I was safe, I was proud of myself, and I learned my lesson. Creepy stranger, I hope the events of that day taught you not to underestimate girls and prevented you becoming a criminal for the rest of your life. So let's never meet again. Leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but it completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal, right? That's why we have insurance, right? So I went to the neighbor and I told them what happened. I gave them my insurance, my phone number, and my name. But all I got was his first name. From the get-go, this dude was super creepy. He kept hitting on me, trying to date me, and specifically trying to feed me. So I left, and on my drive to my mom's place, I'm attending out-of-state college, and my parents are divorced. The guy that I backed into, Robert, began to text and call me. He was insistent that it was better for the both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to companies that could fix it for $500, and also demanding that I go on a date with him so I could just give him the cash for the repair and that he could feed me. I don't know what his deal with the food was. I declined everything, but I started to get annoyed by his constant texts and calls. Finally, after 2 days of it with my responses only, "Please, just contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me. I then blocked him, but he made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay? And this wasn't a hit and run. I then blocked the second number. Then, he used the new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or video of the accident to his insurance. I admit, this made me angry, so I called this number and I dug my nails so hard into my thigh that I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date and trying to entice me to just pay cash. I finally screamed and said, "Don't contact me again, you fucking inbred piece of shit." And my dad heard me and was upset that I said that to someone that I was in an accident with, and that I said that to a guy who thought that I was cute and just wanted a date. I then blocked the third number. The next day, he reaches out again to tell me that I gave him the wrong policy number. I told him I didn't. He then said that it would be better to just pay with cash and that I was the problem and etc. He was talking to his insurance, I guess, and began trying to validate my info. He had my mom's name, address, and phone number, and I verified it. I told him not to contact me again, and I blocked his new number. The next morning, super early, I get a text, basically saying that he finished the claim and that I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through the insurance and not just going on a date with him. He then included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risk. Stay on the good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got scared and I blocked his fifth number. Then at midnight, he texts me, "Are you up? I know where you live. Don't try and screw me over on insurance. I'll report it as a hit and run. You should have just gone on a date with me." I took the phone to my dad and I showed him the text and then filled him in. My dad is a pretty scary dude. He then calls the guy and he answered, "Shoot, I know you were into me. Wanna come over?" My dad got very mad, and my dad said that this was beyond harassment and that this was his final warning not to contact me and that we didn't care how we reported it and etc. Robert then began saying that I came on to him and offered sex as a payment, and that I invited him to my house and that I was a horny bitch. I instantly blocked the guy and the police are contacted, the insurance was notified, and all the things. The next day, I talked to insurance and a protective order was filed. I get another text telling me that I shouldn't have involved the police. I blocked the seventh number and I notify the police and go stay at my dad's because this dude doesn't have my dad's address. My dad is a very tall and very scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. Well, late last night, watching Star Wars with my dad and older brother, the doorbell rings. That then goes to see who it is, and it's freaking Robert with a trash bag filled with his things that I left at his house. I call the police and my dad goes ballistic. The police then come and arrest the guy. And the bag? Well, lingerie, a knife, lip balm, and a Dita Von Tess fetish book. I just met with an attorney. Plot twist? The guy doesn't even own the house and is an illegal immigrant. He's married and he is being deported. I feel awful that he's being deported, but I genuinely think that he wanted to rape or kill me. I go back to school in a few days and I am so terrified that he or someone else will follow me. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I have been working for a large department store in the UK for just over a year now. This story happened when I was 16. It was late evening at around 9 p.m. or so, as we stay open late for the Christmas rush. I was walking across the shop floor when a man brushed very close to me. I'm often in my own world at work, and this made me jump a little. He must have noticed this because he said, "Hello?" And I responded, and he asked me how I was, and I said, "Good, and you?" He then nodded and walked towards the doors out into the car park. I didn't think much of this at all, but it did catch me off guard. I decided to walk across to the other side of the shop and then continue tidying rails there, Bear in mind, the floor plan of this store is massive. I then hear a man shout from a few meters away, and I look up to see the same guy again. It's only now that I really took notice of his appearance. He had a large tattoo of a dagger on his right cheekbone, and he was wearing a black jumper with a hood pulled up. He was about a foot taller than me and clearly much older. I asked him if he needed any help, and he gestured for me to come closer to him. I tend to freeze and follow instructions in this situation, which is not exactly the best survival instinct. I naively thought that he just wanted to know which exit he needed. He asked me what my name was and I told him. "You've got really pretty eyes," he said, and at this point I was getting a bit freaked out. I thanked him hesitantly and I turned to leave, but he then puts his hand on my forearm. Again, I kind of just froze. Then he asked, "Have you got a boyfriend? Have you got Snapchat? Can I get your number?" He became more and more persistent, and I just wanted him to leave me alone. I told him that number 1, I was working, and number 2, I'm underage. He then asked me how old I was, and I told him that I was 16. Again, I don't know why I answered him, but my brain just shuts down. To which he responded with, "Nah, it could work." At this point, I was really shaken up and I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, one of my male colleagues walked up to me to ask a question, making him leave and winking at me as he did so. Noticing my distress, he asked me what had happened, and I explained the situation to him. He urged me to report it, but I was hesitant as I didn't want to inconvenience anyone or get them into trouble. However, there are a lot of teenage girls that work in the shop, and I wouldn't want them to be targeted, so I told one of the managers. They notified the store security and sent me off the shop floor to get some coffee and calm down. I came back, I finished my shift, and I went to leave. The security guy stopped me on my way out and told me that he didn't mean to alarm me, but they had managed to track the man's car and he was just parked inside it. They said that there was a high probability that he was waiting for me and that I shouldn't go out there by myself just as a precaution. He then escorted me to my mom's car and then we drove home. I'm so thankful that nothing ended up happening to me that night. I often think about what would have happened if my friend didn't persuade me to report it, and I went out alone. As I was walking home from work last night, about halfway to my house, a disheveled man who looked to be either homeless or extremely down on his luck crossed paths with me from the other side of the sidewalk. He had initially been walking in the opposite direction, but as soon as he saw me, he immediately turned around and started following me. He began rambling incoherently and aggressively, and his words were so slurred that I hardly understood a thing he said. All I could make out was something about a care package and look at you. It was obvious that this man was under the influence of multiple substances, so I quickened my pace and tried to avoid any contact with the man, but he was getting agitated that I wasn't paying attention to him at all. When my walking speed got too quick for his inebriated stumbling to keep up with, he stopped talking and instead began to just trying to follow me. I kept looking over my shoulder at him, and every time that I saw him, he would either stop or trying to duck behind a bush. Finally, I started outright sprinting and looking for a spot that I could hide myself in. I came up to my local mosque and I tried to sneak around the corner into the parking lot of it, where there was a tree that I could hide behind. While hiding there, I frantically dialed 911. I told them that a strange man displaying unstable behavior was trying to follow me. I described my location, myself, and also the man to them. The dispatcher assured me that the officers were on their way to where I was. But while waiting for them, I saw a figure heading up the sidewalk in front of the parking lot that I was hiding in. Panic immediately filled me until the passerby was close enough to where I could see that it was not the same man who had just bothered me, and they turned out to be harmless. Mere moments after this, the cops arrived to where I was. They pulled up next to the tree and motioned for me to come out and talk to them. The officer driving the vehicle asked me the standard questions, a description of the incident, where I was when it happened, and etc. And while we were talking, he spotted a man in another parking lot down the street, not far from where I had the first encounter of the creep. He asked me if this was the man that I had encountered, and it was hard to tell between the darkness and the distance, but I was pretty sure it was. Another police vehicle had pulled into that parking lot, and it appeared that an officer got out of it to talk to the man. The officer I had been talking to asked me how far I was from my house, and I told him that I was pretty close to my street at this point. He assured me that I should be safe to walk the rest of the way home, and that they had other cop cars patrolling the area. I thanked him and I finished walking home without further incident, thank God. Shortly after I got home, I saw that I had a text from my boyfriend that read, "Are you okay?" The text had been sent around the time the incident was occurring, as if he could sense that I was in a fearful situation. I replied back telling him what had happened, and he told me that he had got yelled at by a homeless man earlier too. I described the creep that I encountered to him and asked him if he thought that it was the same guy. He said he didn't think so. We also had a brief phone call to make sure that each other was okay. I let him know that I was home safe, and he told me that he was in a vehicle with a group, so he was safe too. I don't know what the cops ended up doing about that man, but I hope that he stays as far away from me as possible. To give context, I used to be a 911 dispatcher for a small city. We dispatched all law, fire, EMS for the entire county, and within this county were multiple law agencies. I had been there for about 3 months or so when I met him. Let's call him Jake. Jake had recently transferred from a big department in California and landed himself randomly at our department. It didn't make much sense as to why he left California in the first place, but he always insisted that it was just time for him to move on to a smaller or less dangerous department. Him and I quickly became close and would chat almost every day after I got off the shift. But within a few months, it became apparent that we liked each other, and our flirting progressed into something more serious. Fast forward a few months later, and it turns out that he was doing some inappropriate things to photos or videos of me whilst he was actively on duty. This, and a few other things he had kept hidden on duty, led him to losing his license and leaving. During the process of his termination, his sergeant had suggested that I get a protective order against him, as he had made threatening statements previously towards me, such as, "You better be telling the truth. I'll find out on Tuesday if you're lying to me," and etc. I had begun to fill out the paperwork, and I was told that I had a temporary protective order on him in the meantime, but don't think that I ever did. About 2 weeks after his termination, he calls me to catch up. The entire call is like an old friend to an old friend. What am I doing for work? Do I have a boyfriend now? But progressively, it turns more personal, Like, when does my shift end? What do I drive? But being 18 and naive, I treated him like I always had, and I was answering his questions. I had contacted his old department afterwards, as his sergeant had told me to let him know if I was ever contacted again. But they turned me away pretty quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. So with that, I blocked Jake. Roughly a month later, I get a call from a new number, and it's Jake. Once again, he wants to meet up and catch up. But this time, he so casually goes on to tell me about this new house that he's wanting to buy in my neighborhood, knowing that it's my neighborhood. I had never told him where I lived in town, let alone what specific neighborhood. And during this call, he progressively gets more aggressive as well, making statements such as, "If I knew I was going to get canned, I should have just had my way with you." He half-heartedly joked about getting a hotel room just for me, and that was that. A few days later, he FaceTimed me, and once again, came off as simply wanting to catch up as he was sick. Midway through our seemingly normal conversation, he makes it apparent that he's been touching himself this entire time. Keep in mind, nothing suggestive was mentioned, and our conversation at that point was about his new dog. Well, I blocked him once again, but he has tried to follow my social media, and now I've started to see him in my area. Last I knew, he lived nearly 30 to 45 minutes in the opposite direction from me. Am I reading into this, or should I genuinely consider this stalking? Every summer, a group of my friends get together to go on a week-long vacation. There's usually 4 of us, but this year, we bullied our friend into bringing her girlfriend too. We would decide on a place and a couple of activities to do in the area, and then we would rent a condo or vacation home, so we had the whole place to ourselves, instead of going back and forth between hotel rooms. We all agreed on Utah, as we wanted to go hiking in the national parks. We found a small home for a great price. It didn't have many reviews, but the ones that were there were all great. It was a 2-bedroom with a sectional in the living room, as well as one of those giant recliner chairs. Plenty of room for all of us to hang out and sleep in. We went in late June, and we all met up at Layla and Desiree's place, so they agreed to drive this year, as Desiree had an SUV so we could fit better. It took us about 20 hours or so to get there. Thankfully, Layla is also good with cars, so I was grateful that she came with us. The house had a pin lock, so no key was needed, and it made it so much easier on 5 people. We got in, and it looked even better than the pictures. When we weren't outside, we were definitely going to be spending a lot of time in the living room, and I called dibs on the chair the moment I sat in it. There was a huge flat screen with 2 racks of movies and TV shows, and they had stocked up the kitchen with tons of different snacks and food with a long shelf life. Different kinds of granola bars, chips, popcorn, dried fruit, bottles of water, and the fridge was like a small liquor store with beers, wines, and mixers. There was even a small pool in the back that was full and kept clean. The bedrooms had a king size in one and a queen in the other. Layla and Des took one room, and Natalia got the other, and Alma, Hannah, and I took on the living room. There was a note on the fridge with rules and requirements, like the normal that we see in these places. Usually, they just post them on the rental site, but sometimes you may find them in the rental or additional request. The rules had a lot of normal, no smoking, if you break it, you replace it, contact for any maintenance issues, and etc. But one of them was different. It mentioned keeping the shower curtain to the right, as it allows the light from the window to shine in and help with drying the floor, preventing mold and mildew. I didn't know how any of that worked, so it made sense to me, so I reminded the girls and I moved on. Once we all got unpacked, we went to the grocery store to pick up a few things to make our own dinners. We then just had a nice night in, and while we determined our plans for the next days. The next day we went to Zion National Park. It was one of my favorite parks that I had gone to. There were plenty of trails to walk on, but there were also a few streams that we ran into that we took advantage of to cool off. We may have even filled the bottle with some of the water as a nice reminder of the time that we had there. And by the time we got all the way around, we were hot and exhausted, so we picked up food and brought it back to the house. After eating, I decided to go take a shower. As I went into the bathroom, I rubbed my hands against the wall to turn on the light, and as I did this, I saw what looked like a light that was coming from the shower. I turned the light on and saw nothing. I turned the light back off and still nothing. Thinking that I was just seeing things, maybe the moonlight from the stained glass window or something, I moved on with my shower. And the rest of the night went as usual. We drank and talked, and then we passed out. The next day, we decided to make it more laid back. We went shopping, found a local place to eat, and would then head back to go swimming. Once we got home, Natalia wasn't feeling really well, so we decided to skip swimming and watch a movie instead. As we settled in with our snacks, Des was picking out a movie. She pulled out 50 First Dates, one of my favorites. But when she opened it, her face changed from all smiles to confusion. She said that it was a blank disc and that it looked like it was a homemade video with the title, Young Couple 2018. We were confused by this, but poor Layla in her naivety thought that maybe it was the owner of this place and that they put it in the wrong case. But based on the look on Desiree's face, we both had the same thought. She put the DVD in the player, and to our disgust, we were right. This was home footage of this very place. The worst part is that it was coming from the bathroom. And that's when it clicked in my head. The light that I saw in the bathroom. I started telling them about what I saw, and Des told me to show her. I followed her to the bathroom as we started looking around based on the angle of the video we saw. She rubbed her hand along the walls, and right between two tiles, toward the top, she could see a small gap. And after looking closer, she could tell that there was a small hole. She immediately told us to get out, close the shower curtain, and then shut the door. Now it was obvious why they wanted the curtain in that position. It kept the view of the camera open to the rest of the bathroom. At this point, we had called the cops, and all 5 of us had showered, dressed, and used that bathroom. I know that I speak for them as well when I say that I felt violated. And by the time that they arrived, we had already packed up all of our stuff and in tears, and we explained what we had found. They saw the video, and they saw the spot where the camera was in the bathroom. And without us realizing, Des had gone to the bedroom that they stayed in and found one in a vase of fake flowers on a corner shelf. It was buried between other little belongings, so it was just as hard to see. Who knew how many more cameras there were? I know the owner had been contacted, and the cops had to call the vacation place that we went through to get his contact information. We all pressed charges, and he tried to say that it was for security. Don't worry, that line didn't work because he wasn't allowed to put them inside the home, only the outside. Oh, and not to mention, keep the recordings on top of that. We did get a full refund from the company, thankfully, because we had to get a hotel room. We thought about going back home, But Des wouldn't let us back down. She convinced us not to let that stop us and ruin our plans. Unfortunately, we are too afraid to rent from individuals now with this in the back of our mind. But we agreed that Des should be a permanent addition to our trips due to her attention to detail. We just spent a little extra money for a bit more peace of mind. So this happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. A little backstory here. We lived in this small town for several years and it was safe. A few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and kids moving 2 houses down from us, and our house was built sometime in 1920s. A few nights before this incident happened, our other siblings locked us out of the back door, and us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just hanging. One of our blinds were also broken. We didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was tight growing up. Anyways, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage in our driveway, and next to the driveway, on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned, and it had tall shrubs. But what we didn't know was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs watching us. I'm gonna leave some details out to make a long story short. My little sister's name will be Candace, and my name will be Aria. It was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend was a mile from our house fishing at about 10 p.m. at night. All of our siblings and my parents were asleep, besides my oldest brother out with his girlfriend fishing. I was sitting in front of the TV watching, and Candace was sitting on the bed watching TV with me too. All of a sudden, Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up and then we ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend twisted her ankle. And he then gets home. By this point, we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. And my brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4" and 300 pounds. And unknown to my family, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know, it was stupid for me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet, and he ran back to our fence in the backyard. He gets within arm's reach of this guy, and then he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother, and then takes off running, and then hops the fence and he got away sadly. I didn't see this because I went back into the house after a while. My brother then comes in and he tells everyone that he saw a guy in all black and he's about 6 foot. That's all that he saw though. The rest of the night was all calm, but my brother was on high alert. The next night, my brother was out with his girlfriend wherever they were at that time. It was again about 10 at night, and Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as the last time. Again, we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again, called our brother's cell phone, he came home again. The whole house was awake again, and all the lights were on. My brother goes out and checks it out. This time, he didn't see anyone out there. We forgot to mention that both of these times, we looked at the back door. Both times, the back door looked like it was kicked in really hard. And this time around, the frame was out of the wall more. The door was leaning further into the house. We didn't make any police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us. And while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids, and we didn't really see him much. And when he did though, he was so sweet and so nice to us. But anyways, we told the police officer what had happened, and he told us that he thinks there are two guys that have been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks, and he said that he believes that there is two guys. One is the lookout and hides right there in the shrubs, and he keeps a lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through our broken blinds, and he said at night they could look in, and you couldn't see anything if you look out. After those 2 nights, there was no attempted break-ins anymore. Fast forward to the fall of that year, our cop neighbor told us something that he was not supposed to tell us, but he said that they caught a peeping Tom and that he's in jail now about 20 or so miles away. He said that after the peeping Tom was caught, it all stopped and the town was safe again. Candace and I were so freaked out and scared that to this day, her and I have to have all our doors and windows locked. We check multiple times a day, and if any of our curtains are open, we get scared. We close the curtains every single time, and I'm honestly afraid that it will happen again. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is still there. Sorry for this long post. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were. I think if he would have gotten in, then we wouldn't be here today, so this is all scary to us. As for our stalker/peeping Tom, let's not meet again. The school day ended like any other. I walked home, my backpack slung over my shoulder. As I stopped at the crossway, a car slowed beside me, the window rolling down to reveal a man that I didn't recognize. He had a snapback and a few tattoos. He smiled at me before saying, "Hey kid, need a ride?" As I said before, I didn't know who this was, so I politely declined, stranger danger and all. His face turned from friendly to one of annoyance. He scowled before saying, "Come on, kid, get in." Of course, I kept saying no, looking hopefully at the light, waiting for it to be safe for me to cross the street. But he seemed to be more aggressive by the minute. "Get in the damn car, bitch!" he yelled. As he opened his door, I saw the sign turn to the walk sign, so I sprinted across the crossway, not even looking back, but I could hear him getting back into his car. After a few seconds, I noticed his car trailing beside me. He was trying to follow me home. Realizing that, I decided to run back to the school. I ran into the building and past the office. The secretary, noticing my panic, asked me what was wrong, and I told her about the creepy car guy. She put a hand on my shoulder to comfort me and told me that she will call my parents to pick me up. Half an hour later, my dad pulled into the parking lot, and after seeing him, I ran towards him and I hugged him tightly. After being filled in on the situation, we then went back home. On the drive back, I kept looking around, seeing if the car from before was following us, but I didn't see him, but I still felt scared. The following days, my dad continued to pick me up and did so for a long time. It wasn't until the next semester that I was able to walk home again, and I only did so with a group of friends. This happened when I was 15, going on 16. I'm also an only child, so while yes, people may think that I'm lucky because I get more than some households with multiple children, I would much rather have siblings. It can get very lonely and boring. And with that being said, I usually get to invite a friend or cousin to go on trips or to special events with my parents and I. If we go to the movies or a theme park or maybe the swimming pools, I usually get to bring someone. Spring break was not much different. My parents owned a condo in Florida, so sometimes we would go there for spring break, in the summer, or even for Christmas break. This year, we were going to be going there for spring break again, and it was also important to me because my birthday is in April, so it was supposed to be part of my Sweet 16. Because of this, my parents agreed to let me take a friend with me. As mentioned, I've had friends go with me on trips, but they have all been within the state. I've had cousins go with me to Florida, but never a friend of my choice. Rightfully so, I was excited about this. It was also part of my birthday gift, so I felt more like an adult. So after all the parent talk and confirming locations, and that my parents weren't planning on selling off my friend, things were set and I was going to have some pre-birthday fun. My friend and I did have to keep our grades up in order to go, so after about a month of making sure that everything was done and turned in on time, we were in the clear and on our way to Florida. We had plans to go to the beach, Universal Studios, and also just go to a mall or something to go shopping by ourselves. We got to choose our seats on the airplane, and we sat a few rows in front of my parents so we could have privacy. And when we got there, they even let us sit at our own table at dinner. We did do a few things with my parents wanted to do, like some kind of water boat ride thing with all these alligators around it, and we went to Hard Rock Cafe because my dad is obsessed with that place. Things were going as normal for a while, but I will definitely say that my arrogance got the best of me, thinking that I was an adult. So the day came for us to go to Universal Studios. This is where we first started having troubles. My parents were still with us the entire time, but they didn't always go on the rides, but they were there when we got on, and then they would be at the exit when it was over. On some of the rides that we had to wait on, we were standing there, people watching, and we noticed one guy in particular. He stood out because 1, he didn't have any kids with him or anyone else, and 2, he had one of those tank tops with a muscular torso on it to make it look like it was your own. Those just look weird on anyone, but especially on him. He ended up on one of the rides that we went on, and he just stared at us the entire time. We sat in the back of one of the rides, so he couldn't stare at us, but he even looked back at us before it started and then smiled. We were young and didn't really know how to react, so we just waved and smiled back. We saw him a couple more times, but he was never around when my parents were there with us. And since he didn't really do anything though, we didn't bother telling them, and we just tried to enjoy our time there. We were there for most of the day, so we were pretty tired the next day. We wanted to go to the mall, but my parents said that we should just hang out there, maybe go to the beach or relax or something, and then go the next day. We ultimately agreed, but the beach was looking pretty busy, so we stayed in most of the day, doing our hair and also our makeup. My mom said that she was going to run to the store to pick some stuff up for dinner, and that my dad would be working on some things, so they agreed to let us go to the beach for a while by ourselves, since it was within walking distance of the condo. Again, it was exciting because we got to do something on our own, so with our hair and makeup done, we grabbed our stuff to head to the beach. We got out there, laid our stuff out, and just sat there for a while talking. We took our phones, of course, and was taking stupid filter pictures. And to our surprise, we see the tank top guy walking towards us. Again, we didn't really know how to react, so we just sat there and tried to pretend that we were busy or having a serious conversation. He got maybe 5 to 10 feet from us, and stopped and just kind of looked around and then laid out like this sleeping bag of some sort. He sat down and looked up the sky and then looked over at us. He smiled and then waved again, and I again just waved back. I was facing him while my friend was facing away, so while we were having a fake serious conversation, I was just texting her to say, "Hey, he noticed us. He waved." So we started thinking about leaving when he started talking to us. It was okay at first, but then it got weird. The conversation went something like this. He said, "Did you girls have fun at Universal?" We answered yes. He then asked, "That's good. They had some new ones out there, huh?" We answered, I don't know. I haven't been in a while and she's never been." He asked, "Oh, do you live around here?" We told him no, and then he asked if we were just on a vacation. We told him yes, and then he said, "You girls didn't get all prettied up to be out here by yourself though, did you?" We told him that we were not alone, and then he asked us if we were waiting on our boyfriends. I answered no, but my friend said yes, and we didn't get to fully think at our answers. At this point, it was definitely getting uncomfortable with a full-grown adult asking 16-year-olds about having a boyfriend and then calling us pretty. So we decided to come up with an excuse to leave. I started to grab my phone like I was getting a call to come home, and I'd tell my friend that we had to go, so we started grabbing our stuff and then he said, "Leaving already?" I tried saying the same thing about needing to go home when he started standing up real quick and said, "Well, if no one is here with you girls, then let me walk you home. You never know the kind of people that could be walking around." We of course said that it was okay and that I was staying in a nearby place. Then my friend gave me a look, making me realize how stupid that was. He seemed to catch on because he had a very sinister grin and said something about, "Well, even better, it should be a short walk then, right?" My friend finally jumped in and said that we were fine, and then she grabbed me by my arm and we started walking quickly away from him. We were still pretty worried about the whole situation, and we turned around and noticed that he was still standing there, smiling and holding his sleeping bag. We kept on walking, and the condo was probably about a block away, so when we went around the corner, we stopped for a second to think about what just happened. My friend was freaked out too, but she was laughing about it and then making fun of the guy. I finally loosened up a bit, and then we kept walking. At one point, we started trying to do cartwheels home, just playing around and trying to shake off the weird vibes. And as I landed a cartwheel, I see him around the corner. He tried to make it look like he was on his phone, but he was holding it like he was taking pictures. At this point, we booked it. We ran straight ahead and paid no attention to him, and then just ran. And as we did, there was a woman and a young girl about to enter one of the condos close to us. So I just started shouting out, "Oh, Mom, you called me. What's up?" The woman looked confused at first, but she must have seen the fear in our face and immediately started looking around and shuffled us into her place. I know, it may have still been silly, but I thought that since she had a kid with her, she was safe. And once we were in, we explained to her what happened. She believed us thankfully, and since she was leaving, she agreed to walk us home but told me to call my dad to make sure that he was out there to greet us. Thankfully, he was nowhere to be seen after that, but we did tell my dad and they called the cops to file a report, but as far as I know, they never found or caught the guy. And from then on, we were definitely more cautious of our surroundings, and my parents stayed close by, but we still had fun. It was definitely a memorable trip. I felt bad for my friend, thinking that she'd probably never be able to do something like that again. But I've also learned my lesson and was thankful for my friend and also that lady. I am also a lot less naive in my late 20s and with my own kid, so I know that I'll be stressing the importance of strangers and also trusting your gut. But since then and always, I hope to never see Tank Top Dude again. I had recently come back to work after being off for over a year on mat leave. When I came back, it was nice to get into the swing of things again and start to have a new routine outside of being home all day. There's a coworker that not everyone gets along with, and he's kind of an odd guy, so it's understandable. Anyways, when I came back, there is a process that this said coworker is trying to have implemented at work, and I made the mistake of saying that I agreed slightly with. I also made the mistake of being the nice person and having a conversation with a guy because he knows a family member of mine. After having that initial conversation, it's been non-stop since then. This said person has stalked my Facebook to see that I had gone to a certain college, what program I took, and how long my course was, and etc. Anytime that I go into the lunchroom, he's just lingering around there pacing and waiting to talk to me if our break or lunches overlap. One day, when I finished work, I was waiting for my mom to pick me up outside. I look up across the street, and lo and behold, Buddy is standing at the crosswalk coming back to work. He was done with his shift an hour before mine. I instantly called my mom and asked her to stay on the phone with me till she got to my work. He came across the street and just waited outside of our work, looking at me and waiting for me to get off the phone. When my mom arrived, I hopped in my mom's truck in hopes that it was just a coincidence. But when we drove off, he was walking away from our workplace. That made me so uncomfortable. At work now, when I'm busy doing a job, he will just come and hover and stare at me, waiting to talk to me, and I just try and politely ignore the situation. I'd like to say let's not meet again and have that happen, but nah, joke's on me. He's like 10 cubicles away from me. Maybe I'm just a paranoid person, but it makes me so uncomfortable. Update. So, a few more incidents have happened. One being that I forgot my work pass and I had to get a temporary one. And when I went to take my pass back, I came out of the elevator and he was standing there. I ignored him and I walked away down the hall into our main office. But when I came back about 5 minutes later, he was still standing there. I hit the elevator button and he got on when I did and stared at me the entire time. It really creeped me out a lot. Then, when I was on lunch one day, he randomly asked if I wanted to go to dinner for the work thing that he was trying to implement. I told him no, that I couldn't, as I wouldn't be able to find a babysitter. It bothered me that he asked, and he then sent me an email to my personal email that he wanted me to come to this dinner. So a few days ago, when I was on my lunch and I was sitting with a friend in the lunchroom and just about to pack up, he then walks in. He goes around the room and then circles the table that we were sitting at and then stares at us. I got uncomfortable, so I went to fill my water bottle up. When I cleaned it out and went to refill it, as I turned around, he was right behind me, like less than a foot. I jumped, and I told him not to do that, as he scared the crap out of me being so close behind me. I was nervous, laughing the entire time, saying, "Oh, you just scared the shit out of me." So he then left the room and didn't come back for a few minutes. When he came back into the room, he just stared at me again, so I quickly got my things together and I went back into our work area, even though I still had 10 minutes left of my lunch. I just didn't want to be in there. When I came back to my desk is on the other side of the room from the doors into it. His desk, however, is right beside the door. He came back into the work area and came and stood near my desk until I was done with my lunch. It made me so uncomfortable, so when I was done with my work, I went and spoke with my manager, who got me to send an email to him professionally asking him to leave me be. I did this, and he wasn't in until the next morning, and I was off the next day. So obviously, when I was at home the next day, I checked my work email. His reply was that he didn't understand how being asked to dinner was bothering me. I replied that I just wanted to be left alone, and I did this in a very professional and nice way. And he replied with, "Do you habitually check your emails from home? You're not scheduled to work today." So in the work email that I sent him professionally, he proved my point of him keeping tabs on me. You have to go through about a 6-stage process to see another coworker's schedule. I forwarded the emails and replies to my manager, and he is going to keep making sure that Buddy leaves me alone. I'm so happy that I said something, as this has been progressing into a worse situation. Thank you for everyone's advice about talking to an HR or a manager, and I have also removed him from my Facebook and blocked him. In the fading light of a chilly autumn afternoon, I trudged my way home from high school. The weight of my backpack felt familiar, but today was different. I sensed eyes on me. I quickened my pace, but a beat-up sedan idled alongside of me. Its engine was rumbling ominously. The driver, a middle-aged man with a greasy cap, leaned over and offered a smile that made my skin crawl. "Need a ride, sweetheart?" He leered, his words laden with an unsettling familiarity. No, thank you," I stammered, my nerves rising. The refusal soured his expression, and he sped off in a huff. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I was glancing over my shoulder over and over again, and my heart pounded as I saw the same car tailing me in the distance. Fear clutched at my chest as I turned into quieter streets, the echo of my own footsteps amplifying my anxiety. Each turn I looked, the car mirrored. Panic set in when I realized that this man was following me. I darted into the alleys, crossed the busy intersection, but the sedan persisted, inching closer. My trembling legs carried me to a more crowded area, a mall. After I walked into the building, I saw the man getting out of his car, and that's when instinct kicked in. With adrenaline pumping, I sprinted, my breath hitching in my throat, desperate to lose him in the crowd. If I could just break line of sight and hide from him, then I could sneak away. The man briskly jogged behind me, but given how out of shape he was and how suddenly I started running, I easily managed to duck into a store without being seen and hide behind some shelves. One of the clerks looked at me with concern, but then noticed the man running past, huffing and puffing as he did. The clerk asked if I was okay and said that he could call security on the man. I told him that I would be all right as soon as I caught my breath, and when I did, I peeked out, checking both ways to see if the coast was clear. Sure enough, the man was nowhere in sight, so I started briskly walking in the opposite direction that he had gone in. I went straight to the exit and then went on my way home. I was looking back ever so often just to make sure that I wasn't being followed again. Finally thinking, I called my mother. My phone clutched tightly, and I told her the entire ordeal as I walked back home. Finally, my house loomed in the distance, and I could see my mother walking outside towards me. I ran to her arms and hugged her, and I never saw that creep again, but I hope that I never will. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.